I hadn't worn the badge in 12 years when the call came in. I was at my kitchen table, the kind with the loose leg that wobbles if you lean wrong. Rain tapped against a window in a soft, steady way. I remember thinking it sounded like fingers, counting time. I was halfway through a cup of coffee that had gone cold when my phone buzzed. The number was from the county office. I almost didn't answer. When I did, the woman on the line spoke like she was reading from a card. She said my name, my full name. She said they were updating old records and needed someone familiar with legacy locations. That was the phrase she used, legacy locations. She said Dry Creek Station was scheduled for final archival clearance. She said there were boxes of files that needed to be retrieved before demolition. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but I did. Dry Creek Station had been officially closed in 1989. That's what the paperwork said. But no one ever demolished it. No one ever reassigned it either. It just stopped being mentioned, like a name you avoid at family dinners. I told her that place wasn't on any active list. I told her it hadn't been decommissioned properly. She paused and said, "That's why we're calling you." She said the keys were still valid. I should have said no. The drive out there took almost 2 hours. The road narrowed the farther I went, the lines fading until it was just cracked asphalt cutting through wet land and tall grass. The rain got heavier, blurring the edges of everything. I passed the old sign for Dry Creek, the one with the paint peeling so bad you could barely read the name. I remember the last night I worked there. No ceremony, no goodbye, just silence. The station sat where it always had, at the edge of town, facing the tracks. The building looked smaller than I remembered, like it had shrunken on itself. The windows were dark, no lights, no movement. The flagpole out front was bare, rope still tied, flag long gone. I parked and sat there longer than I needed to. The air felt thick, not cold, just heavy, like it didn't want to move. When I unlocked the front door, it opened too easily. No rust, no resistance. Inside, the smell hit me first. Paper, dust, old metal, and something else underneath it. Something stale, like a room that had been holding its breath. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing on the front desk. The same scratches were still there. The same coffee ring. Even the corkboard behind it still had notices pinned up. Missing pets, noise complaints, a church bake sale that never happened. Everything was exactly where it had been. Too exactly. I walked down the hall, my footsteps sounding wrong, like the floor was listening. The offices were untouched, desks still cluttered, calendars still flipped to October 1989. I checked one. The date was circled in red. My handwriting. I didn't remember doing that. The evidence room door was locked, but my key worked. Inside, shelves lined the walls, boxes stacked and labeled. Some were marked with years that came after the station closed. 1993, 2001, 2014. That didn't make sense. I told myself it was a clerical error. Old boxes moved here for storage. That kind of thing happens. I didn't believe it, but I said it anyway, out loud. My voice sounded small in there. I found the files I was supposed to retrieve in the back room. Cardboard boxes stamped with the county seal. They were heavier than I expected. When I lifted one, the bottom nearly gave out. Papers shifted inside, like something settling. That's when I heard the radio. A low crackle. Static. I froze. The radios had been shut off when the station closed. Power cut. Lines dead. The sound came again, clearer this time. Static, then a faint tone, like someone pressing the button, but not speaking. I followed it to the dispatch room. The console lights were on. Dim, but on. The clock above it read 2:43 a.m. I hadn't noticed the time change. The radio crackled again, and this time a voice came through. Not loud, not panicked, just calm. Dry Creek, to Sheriff Collins. Are you on site? They used my name, my old title. I didn't answer. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed something sharp. The voice continued. Files need to be logged before departure. I stepped back. My foot hit something on the floor. A logbook. Open. I picked it up with shaking hands. The last entry was dated today. My handwriting. It said, Arrived to retrieve records. Station still active. I dropped the book. The radio clicked again. Sheriff Collins confirmed. I backed toward the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear in my ears. The lights flickered. Not off, just dimmer, like a warning. I thought about all the calls we never resolved, all the cases that just stopped, people who vanished without reports being filed properly, complaints we ignored because they came from the wrong side of town. I remembered locking cells that were still warm. The radio crackled one last time before I reached the hallway. Station cannot be decommissioned, the voice said. Not while records remain incomplete. The front door was locked. I know it was. I tried it twice. Behind me, the radio tone rose, steady and patient. I stood there in the dark, holding boxes of files that suddenly felt very heavy, realizing something I should have known a long time ago. Dry Creek Station was never closed. It was waiting. I didn't sleep after that night. I drove home with the boxes in my trunk. Every mile feeling stolen. The rain followed me the whole way, thick and steady, like it wanted to erase my tracks. I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see the station lights glowing behind me. Even when I was miles away, at home, I stacked the boxes in my spare room and shut the door. I told myself I'd open them in the morning. I didn't. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table again, the same loose leg, the same cold coffee. I stared at the wall and listened to the house settle, pipes ticking, wind brushing the siding, normal sounds, safe sounds. Then my old radio crackled. It was sitting on the counter. I hadn't plugged it in. I hadn't touched it in years. The static came first, soft, curious, like someone clearing their throat. I stood slowly, my chair scraping the floor too loud in the quiet house. My heart was already racing, even before the voice came through. Dry Creek dispatched to Sheriff Collins. I closed my eyes. I told myself it was stress, memory, my brain replaying old habits. But the radio kept going. Report of a disturbance on Mill Road. Possible domestic. No units responding. Mill Road. I knew that road. Everyone did. Long stretch of dirt. 3 houses, all too far apart to hear each other scream. I whispered, that never happened. The radio clicked like it heard me. Correction, the voice said. It hasn't happened yet. I unplugged the radio. The static didn't stop. I yanked the cord out of the wall, my hand shaking. The sound stayed. It came from inside the radio now, deeper, fuller, like it had grown roots. I grabbed the thing and threw it into the sink. Turned the faucet on full blast. Water poured over it. The voice didn't change. Sheriff Collins. It said, calm as ever. You're the only unit available. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. That night, I locked every door and slept with the lights on. I dreamed of phones ringing in empty rooms, of paperwork filling itself out, ink bleeding through pages. The next morning, I drove back to Dry Creek. I don't know why. I told myself I needed answers. Truth is, I felt pulled, like if I didn't go, something worse would follow me home. The station looked the same as before. Quiet, waiting. Inside, the radio console was already on. The clock read 3:12 a.m. I checked my watch. It was 10:47 in the morning. I opened one of the boxes I brought back. Inside were reports I didn't recognize. Names I'd never seen. Dates that hadn't happened yet. One file caught my eye. Mill Road domestic disturbance. I flipped it open. The details were thin. A husband, a wife, raised voices. A neighbor who thought about calling, but didn't. The report ended with a blank space where the outcome should be. My radio crackled. Update pending. The voice said. I slammed the file shut. This isn't real, I said. Saying it out loud felt important, like a line in the dirt. The radio responded. It will be. I stayed there all day. Every time I tried to leave, another call came in. A shoplifting that hadn't happened. A missing person not yet missing. Each one had my name on it. Each one waited for me to respond. By evening, my head hurt. My thoughts felt slow, like they were moving through mud. The last call came just before sunset. Dry Creek dispatched to Sheriff Collins. Fatal accident reported on Route 6. My stomach dropped. Route 6 ran right past my house. I opened the file. My hand shook so bad I nearly tore the page. Single vehicle. Loss of control. Rain slick road. Driver. Male. Age 62. My age. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. No, I whispered. You don't get to do that. The radio crackled, softer now, almost gentle. Reports must be filed, it said, or events proceed unchecked. I thought about Mill Road, about the blank space in that file. I thought about all the times I'd looked the other way when I wore the badge, the calls I'd marked as low priority because I was tired or angry or just wanted to go home. My pen felt heavy in my hand. I filled in the Mill Road report. Nothing dramatic, just enough. A unit dispatched. Situation resolved. No injuries. The radio went quiet. I sat there a long time, staring at the clock as it slowly synced with my watch. When I finally left, the station let me. That night, the radio stayed silent at home. But I know now, the calls aren't predictions. They're requests. And every time the static starts, it's asking me the same thing. What am I willing to let happen if I don't answer? I told myself I wouldn't go back. After the radio went quiet, I tried to live like a normal retired man. I bought groceries. I watched the news. I nodded at neighbors I barely knew. I even slept for a few hours at a time. But something stayed wrong inside me, like a low hum I couldn't turn off. It felt unfinished. 3 nights later, the rain came back. Slow, steady, the kind that sounds like fingers tapping on glass. I woke up at 2:41 a.m. for no reason at all. I was already sitting up when the thought hit me. The jail. I hadn't gone down there yet. The station had offices, records, dispatch, and the holding cells in the back. I hadn't stepped foot in them since my last shift decades ago. I always hated that hallway. No windows, just concrete and old paint that never stopped smelling like sweat and bleach. I tried to ignore the thought, but it wouldn't let me. By 3:05, I was dressed. By 3:30, I was driving. The station door opened like it knew me. Inside, the lights were dimmer than before. Some overhead bulbs flickered. Not enough to go dark, just enough to make the shadows feel restless. My footsteps echoed louder than they should have, bouncing back at me like someone else was walking behind me. I stopped once, heart pounding, and listened. Nothing. Too much nothing. The hallway to the cells felt longer than I remembered. The walls were scuffed, marked with old dents from boots and shoulders and fists. Names scratched into paint. Dates carved deep, like they want to stay forever. I reached the first cell and froze. The door was closed. That shouldn't have been possible. All the cells were supposed to be open, empty, rusted into uselessness. I stepped closer. The bars were cold and clean, not polished, but wiped recently. Inside, the bench had a thin blanket folded on it, not old and dusty. Fresh. My mouth went dry. I moved to the next cell. Same thing. Closed door. Clean floor. A cup sitting by the drain. Still damp. I could smell it now. That old jail smell. Metal. Sweat. Fear. It hadn't been here before. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice felt wrong in that space, like it didn't belong anymore. No answer. I told myself maybe someone else had been here. Some contractor. Some idiot kids breaking in. But I knew better. The third cell had marks on the wall. Tall marks. Fingertips dragged downward. I remembered making those marks. Not with my hands. With someone else's. There was a man once. I won't say his name. He was drunk, angry, and scared of everything. He clawed at the wall when the door closed. Begged me not to leave him alone. I did anyway. That cell was empty now. The fourth cell wasn't. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear breathing. Slow, wet, close. I stepped back, my heart slamming so hard I thought it might echo. "Who's there?" I asked. The breathing stopped. Then the radio on my belt crackled. I hadn't turned it on. Cell occupancy confirmed. The voice said, my name followed. Soft, familiar. I shook my head. No, that's not possible. The breathing started again. I leaned forward, just enough to look through the bars. The cell looked empty, but the air inside it moved, like someone standing just out of sight. I smelled something sour. Old blood, old regret. I remembered faces then. Too many. Men and women who sat on these benches, staring at the floor. Some deserved it. Some didn't. Some I never checked on again. The door rattled. Just once. Like a knuckle tapping metal from the inside. I stumbled back and hit the opposite wall. I don't work here anymore. I said, I did my time. The radio crackled again. Sentence not complete. The lights flicker harder now. For a moment, the hallway felt longer, stretched, like it didn't want me to leave. The door rattled again. This time, I heard a voice. Not loud, not angry, tired. Sheriff, it said, you forgot me. My knees nearly gave out. That voice belonged to a boy. 17, picked up for stealing a truck. Scared out his mind. He told me he couldn't breathe in tight spaces. I laughed and told him he'd get used to it. He hung himself with his shirt before morning. I never opened the door that night. I pressed my hands over my ears. But the voice kept going. I waited, it said. You never came. The cell door began to open, slowly. I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was at the control panel. My fingers shook as I slammed the override down. The door stopped. The breathing turned into something else. Crying, not loud, just enough to hear. The radio spoke again, low and calm. Cells remain occupied until release is granted. I looked down the row. Every cell door was shut now, every one of them breathing. I felt small, old, tired in a way sleep could never fix. What do you want? I whispered. The crying faded. The radio answered. Witness. I stayed until morning. I sat on the bench outside the cells and listened. Sometimes the voices spoke. Sometimes they just breathed. None of them asked to be let out. They just wanted me there. When the sun finally rose, the cells went quiet. The doors unlocked on their own. Inside there was nothing. No blankets. No cups. No marks. Just cold concrete and memory. I left the station shaking. That night at home, I dreamed of doors closing, of keys turning, of people calling my name from rooms I couldn't open. And I knew then, the station isn't holding criminals. It's holding what I left behind. And as long as I keep coming back, they stay locked up. I don't know what happens when I stop. I should have stayed home. I should have let the files sit, let the old station rot in peace. But something inside me kept pulling me back, like the long fingers of storm tugging on the doors. I told myself it was curiosity. I told myself I had to see it through. The truth was worse. I needed to see it, or I wouldn't have survived the nights. The drive back was silent. Rain drumming against the windshield in patterns that felt deliberate. I kept expecting to see headlights behind me. There were none. That was when I realized the roads weren't familiar anymore. Every turn, every mile, felt stretched, elongated, like the town itself was adjusting to my presence. I passed signs that were familiar, yet the names were wrong. Mile markers I should have read for red 9. Streetlights flickered in the same rhythm as my heartbeat, and I began to wonder if the world had become nothing but a reflection of the station itself. When I arrived, the station looked older yet untouched. The paint peeled, but the doors gleamed as if freshly polished. Inside, the air was thick with the same metallic tang that always hit me. Iron rust, and something I couldn't name but felt like remorse. The desk was there, untouched, yet the radio on it buzzed with life. Static filled the room like dust and sunlight, yet there was something deliberate in it, a rhythm, a pulse. I reached for the radio. My fingers trembled. I'd handled it 1,000 times before. Every shift, every call, every report filed neatly. But now it felt alive. Sheriff. The radio whispered, not in words exactly, but in meaning. I jerked back, my heart thudding. No one else should be here. No one had been here in decades. I reminded myself I was alone. I repeated it like a mantra. Alone. I walked down the hall. Every step echoed. But the echoes weren't mine alone. There were others. I could hear them faintly behind me, pressing close, breathing just beyond perception. I told myself it was imagination. I told myself it was old memories clinging to the walls. Then I reached the cells. The doors were closed, every single one. But I knew, I could feel it. They were watching, waiting, and they weren't criminals. Not anymore. I remember my first shift here. The first man I locked behind bars for breaking the law. He cried. I didn't know why. The law was simple, the rules clear, but he begged me for something I didn't understand. And when I left him alone that night, I didn't realize that I had left part of myself behind too. The radio crackled again. Report final. Confirmed. I froze. My name. It had said my name. The whisper didn't come from the speaker. It came from inside me. My chest. My mind. Somewhere beneath the fear. Something familiar recognized itself. I realized then, with sudden clarity, what the station was. It wasn't a jail for criminals. It was a trap. A sanctuary for those who had enforced the law. For those who had sentenced, who had judged, who had failed. And like everyone else before me, I was walking willingly into it. The lights flickered. Shadows moved in impossible ways. I saw a figure in the far cell, but when I blinked, there were dozens. Faces pressed against bars, not angry, not pleading, just watching. They had no names, no words, only the weight of presence. And I knew they had been here long before me, longer than I could measure. I reached for a clipboard that had been left on the desk, reports I had filed, lines I had written. Everything was altered, not by me, not exactly, but the pages told stories I had never recorded, reports of crimes that had never happened, arrests I had never made, names I didn't remember, people I didn't know, but I had a sense of recognition. These weren't mistakes. They were the station speaking through me, guiding me, integrating me. I wanted to run. My legs screamed. The door to the hallway appeared farther away than it should have been. Every turn felt like a mile. The shadows lengthened. And in the shadows, they followed, always following. Not attacking, not pleading, just watching. Judging me as I had judged others. I sat down at the desk. My hands hovered over the radio. I could hear it now, clear like breathing. Dispatch complete, it said, but I hadn't pressed any buttons. I hadn't sent anything. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I knew the message had gone out. Somewhere beyond the station, beyond the roads, beyond the rain, someone had received my final dispatch. I looked at the cells again. Every door was closed, but the breathing, the subtle shifting, told me they were not empty, not even one. And I understood. They never would be. The rain outside intensified. I could see it through the small windows and the doors, a curtain of silver that hid the world beyond. I wanted to call out, but no words came. My throat ached, not from fear, but from knowing what was waiting for me if I tried to leave. I remember the first call I ever answered as a deputy. A woman screaming from a house fire. I arrived too late. Her face haunted me for nights afterward. Every shadow reminded me of her. Every call that crackled over the radio since then was her voice, transformed, waiting for someone who could listen. Now I realized listening was a trap. The act of observing, of logging, of recording. Every single thing I had done in my career had bound me to the station, and I was not its master. I was its prisoner, its instrument, its witness. I tried to stand. My legs refused. I looked down at my hands. They weren't trembling from fear anymore. They were steady, almost eager. The radio whispered again, soft, patient. Release not granted. I understood then that I would never leave. Not truly. The outside world might believe I walked home. It might believe I slept in my own bed. But here, inside these walls, in the cells and the shadows between the lights, I had already joined the roster, already part of the archive of law, of judgment, of presence. I could feel it moving inside me. Something ancient, something deliberate. The station's heartbeat aligned with mine. My thoughts no longer belonged solely to me. Names, faces, reports, they flowed through me into the radio, out into the unseen world. My own life, my own memories began to fold into the archive, indistinguishable from those who had come before. I whispered, almost as if to comfort myself, "It's over." But the radio whispered back, a chorus now, many voices layered soft, almost soothing. Integration confirmed. I looked at the cells. They were still. They were waiting. Not for me. For everyone like me. And I was one of them now. A keeper, a prisoner, a witness. The rain drummed harder on the roof. Outside, the night was endless. Inside, the station breathed with life that was not life. I sat at the desk and began to log, knowing each entry would tether me deeper, and that the world outside was irrelevant. The station existed for us, not the living, and I had become part of it. I would never leave, and I would never stop listening. The final dispatch had already been sent, and it had been sent by me. I didn't know what I had signed up for. Officially, I was just a deputy filling in for a colleague on a temporary assignment. Unofficially, I was assigned to a road that didn't exist on any of the current maps. Highway 92, they called it. Closed, abandoned, wiped clean from the county records. But someone needed to monitor it, and that someone was me. The sky was low and gray when I pulled up. Rain drizzled down. Thin at first, then heavier as I stopped at the cracked asphalt. My cruiser's tires hissed against the wet surface. I reached for the logbook, opened it, and felt a shiver slide down my spine. Blank. Every entry since the road's closure was blank. No reports. No incidents. Only the title, Dead Route. I thought it would be quiet. I thought I'd sit in the car, maybe check my phone, and let the hours pass like they always did on night shifts. But the air smelled wrong. Not rain, not wet asphalt. Something else. Metallic, like iron mixed with ash. Like a wound that had never closed. I leaned back, listening to the rain on the roof. And that's when I noticed it. Movement. Out there, beyond the shoulder, just at the edge of the fog. At first, I thought it was a deer, a stray animal. But it moved wrong. Not fluid. Jerky. Sliding almost. And it wasn't alone. Every time I blinked, it was closer. And yet, when I looked directly, nothing was there. I checked the mirrors. Nothing. I flicked the high beams on and off. Empty. And still I felt it. Eyes, just beyond the glass, following. The radio crackled. Deputy? My hand jumped to the receiver. Static hiss, then silence. I told myself it was a storm. Another deputy trying to reach me. Somewhere I couldn't confirm. I tried to shake it off. But the road had a rhythm now, and I was listening. There was a pulse beneath the wet asphalt, or maybe in the fog itself. Every time the wind shifted, it carried whispers, fragments, broken syllables, like someone reciting names I didn't recognize. But they were familiar. Somehow, achingly familiar. I drove slowly. 1 mile, then another. I wanted to turn back. But the GPS wouldn't locate me. Not the handheld. Not the cruiser system. It was as if I had left a world I knew behind, entering a space that refused mapping. I pulled over. The fog swallowed the cruiser's lights. I could see the road for maybe 50 feet. I stepped out. Rain soaked me instantly. The metal tang grew stronger, sharper, pressing against my senses. And then I heard the voice clearly. Why are you here? No words on the radio. No transmission. Just the air, the fog. Somewhere close, yet nowhere. I spun around. Empty. But the question remained, hanging heavy in the night, pressing into my chest. I got back in the car, trying to steady my shaking hands. The logbook was open. I hadn't written anything yet. I tried to put down my thoughts. Just simple entries. Checked route. No activity. Fog present. Rain steady. But the pen wouldn't move. I pressed harder. Nothing. And then the ink began to smear, forming letters I hadn't written. My name, followed by numbers I didn't understand. Times. Coordinates. I didn't recognize them. They weren't from this world. The headlights picked out shapes in the fog. Trees leaning toward the road, branches like grasping fingers. But beyond them, there were figures. Too tall, too still, standing in the rain as if it couldn't touch them. Their heads tilted, not in curiosity, not in menace, but in expectation. Waiting. I tried the radio again. Static, then a whisper. Do you see them? My blood ran cold. I had to be hallucinating. Exhaustion, the storm, Isolation, it had to be, but then I realized the figures weren't illusions. They moved when I moved. They shifted closer when I slowed. They receded when I sped up. And yet, I never saw them cross the distance I felt them covering. I want to call it in. Dispatch, sheriff, anyone. But every time I reached for the radio, my fingers froze. Something in the air was heavier than gravity, pressing on my arms, my chest, my mind. It was almost a pulse. I wasn't alone here. I drove on, the road stretching impossibly. I tried to remember the county records. Highway 92 had been closed decades ago. No traffic accidents, no patrol logs, no nothing. Yet here I was, following the ghosts of events I didn't understand. And then I saw the car, parked at the side, headlights off. No one inside. License plate rusted and bent. It looked old, abandoned, but the engine was warm. I parked a few feet away. The air changed. Heavy, expectant. I could see my breath in the fog, though the temperature hadn't changed. I felt eyes on me, even as I squinted into the darkened interior of the other car. The door handle moved, slowly, then stopped. There was no one there. Nothing I could see, but I felt the weight of someone or something inside, watching me, waiting. I got back in my cruiser, tried to drive past, but the road seemed endless. The fog thickened, rolling in like a wave that refused to break. I turned on the siren. No sound. The horn? Silent. Even the wipers moved sluggishly, like moving through molasses. I realized then that I wasn't just on a dead road. I was inside it, consumed by it. The maps, the logs, the weather, they were all lies meant to keep me here. I was the only living thing on Highway 92, and they were waiting. The radio crackled again, softer this time, almost intimate. You could not leave. No transmission, no signal, just a voice. My voice, or maybe not, a voice in my head, echoing back the fear I didn't yet have words for. I kept driving, though I knew the road led nowhere. Every turn brought me back to the same point. The abandoned car, the fog, the figures, and the rain, always the rain. It felt alive, pressing down, crawling along the windows, into my hair, into my skin. I stopped again, hands gripping the wheel. My mind was racing, spinning. I was a deputy, sworn protect, to serve. Yet here I was, trapped in a place removed from jurisdiction, from law, from sanity, a road that shouldn't exist, filled with presences that couldn't exist, and a rain that was neither comforting nor cleansing, only observing. The log book on the passenger seat shifted. I hadn't touched it. Open pages flipped as if by a wind that didn't exist inside the car. Names appeared, coordinates, times, all of them connected to me. My past calls, my past arrests, my past mistakes, recorded here in a chronology I hadn't written. I realized I wasn't just on Highway 92. Highway 92 was inside me. The road had chosen me, and it would keep me. The figures were closer now, not threatening, not retreating, simply watching silently, expectantly. The rain fell harder, hammering the roof, yet no drop touched them. They were impossible, and I could feel in my bones. I whispered to myself, almost in prayer, I'm just watching. I'm just observing. The road seemed to pulse. A subtle shift beneath the tires, like the asphalt was breathing. I understood then that this was no ordinary dead route. It was alive, waiting for its keeper, and I had answered the call. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours, days, years, time blurred. Every shift I had logged, every call I had answered, felt like preparation for this moment. I realized I wouldn't leave. Not really. Not ever. The fog thickened to suffocation. The rain pressed against my senses. The figures leaned closer, faceless but knowing. And I understood that I had become part of the road, part of its history, part of its eternal watching. I wrote my first entry in the logbook, not with pen, but with thought. Names, times, presences I could barely comprehend. Highway 92 listened. Highway 92 recorded. Highway 92 waited. And I had been assigned to watch nothing. Except, of course, it was watching me. I woke to the rain again. Not a storm like the ones I'd known. This rain was patient, insistent, crawling along the roof of the cruiser like it had a purpose. I didn't check the clock. I knew, somewhere deep in my bones, I knew what time it was. The call would come. Highway 92, dead route. The fog hung low, pressing against the headlights, and every shadow seemed to twitch in time with my heartbeat. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the slick asphalt beneath the tires, and waited. It started with the radio. Unit, Highway 92, collision northbound curve. The voice was faint, almost a whisper, and then it was gone. No code, no location, nothing I could verify. Just enough to pull me toward the old northern curve. My stomach dropped as I remembered last night, or the night before, or the night before that. They all blended together. Every night, the same call. Every night, the same accident. A car, twisted around a tree, metal crumpled like paper. The headlights always off. The engine silent, yet steam rising from the hood as if it had just happened. And every night, no one inside. No driver. No passengers. Nothing. I reached the curve. The fog thickened, and my headlights barely cut through it. The rain fell harder now, and I thought I saw the glint of headlights up ahead. A car on the shoulder, abandoned, as always. Rusted edges, twisted fender. The windshield cracked in a pattern that looked almost like a screen frozen in glass. I stopped, engine idling, doors locked. I told myself to breathe, to check the scene carefully, to document everything for the logs. But I already knew what I would see. I stepped out. Water soaked my boots instantly. The smell hit me. Burning oil, wet asphalt, something else I couldn't name. Something metallic, coppery, like old blood. My stomach churned. I wanted to run, but my legs moved forward anyway. The car had changed. Each night, slightly. The hood bent differently. The windows fogged over in unnatural patterns. I touched the roof with a gloved hand. Ice cold, yet the rain made everything else lukewarm, almost comfortable. Except for this. Except for the car. And then I heard it. The faintest sound of tires squealing, metal crunching. I spun around. Empty road. Nothing but fog and the rhythmic patter of rain. But the sound came again, behind me this time. Louder. Closer. A collision repeating itself. The air trembled with it. A pulse that echoed inside my chest. I wanted to check the inside of the car. I wanted to see if someone, or something, was still trapped there. I opened the driver's side. Nothing. No body. No belongings. But the smell inside, oil, wet leather, and iron, was stronger. It pressed into my senses, filling my mind with nausea. I stepped back. That's when I noticed the tires. Marks in the asphalt. Skid marks, fresh, looping in impossible patterns. Every night, the same marks. And I had seen them before, traced them with my own eyes, and yet they always returned to the same point. The crash had already happened, and it was happening again. The radio whispered again. Unit northbound, impact 23:17. I froze. That time, the same as the night before, the same as every night. It was a clock I didn't want, but couldn't ignore. I checked my watch. 23:17 exactly. My pulse doubled. I wanted to leave. I wanted to drive past this place, to escape Highway 92, to escape whatever held me here. But the road seemed to stretch farther, longer, curling like a ribbon that refused to end. Every time I tried to accelerate, the cruiser resisted. Tires spun, but the car stayed in place. Like the asphalt itself was holding me, keeping me tied to the same rhythm, the same accident, the same night. I watched the fog, and that's when I saw them. Figures motionless, just beyond the edge of the curve. Watching, waiting, shadows at first, then human shapes. Too tall, too still, their heads tilted, faceless, observing. I tried to blink, to force them out of reality, but when my eyes opened, they hadn't moved. And I couldn't remember if they had been there before, or if they would always be there. The crash echoed again, louder this time, like it was happening simultaneously all around me. I could see the car twisting against a tree. The metal groaned, steam hissed, and I knew it hadn't happened yet, but it had, and it would again. I tried the radio one more time. Dispatch, Nothing. Static. Then a whisper, cold and intimate. You can't leave, not until it's finished. I stumbled back into the cruiser. The door slammed with force I hadn't applied. Rain streamed over the windshield. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape this loop. But the road refused to let me. The car on the shoulder pulsed with an unnatural light. Not headlights. Not internal. Just something. A presence. I could feel it pressing at the edges of my mind. My heartbeat synchronized with it. My chest tight. My limbs heavy. I tried to breathe normally. Couldn't. I realized then what Highway 92 demanded of me. Observation. Witnessing. Logging. Not enforcement. Not rescue. Just being there, watching the same accident, night after night, in the rain that never ceased, in a fog that never thinned. I tried to step out again. The ground shifted under me. My boots sank slightly, but asphalt no longer solid. A pulse ran up my legs, cold and electric, warning me to stay inside. The crash repeated once more, and I felt the vibrations through the car itself. The dead tree branches leaned further into the road, whispering in the wind like fingers brushing my face. I wanted to scream, but no sound came, only the wet air, the pounding rain, and the impossible crash that repeated, each time leaving the scene exactly as it had started. Time became meaningless. The radio whispered my name now, over and over, fragments of syllables, overlapping with the sound of tearing metal and splintering wood. My hands were no longer mine. My eyes no longer mine. I was part of the rhythm now, part of the repetition, part of the wet asphalt and twisted wreckage. And in that moment, I understood Highway 92 didn't just hold dead roads. It held me. It held every accident, every vehicle, every night shift, every whisper of a warning that I couldn't comprehend. And it would continue until I did nothing but watch. I stared at the car, at the twisted wreck, at the figures in the fog, and I knew I was trapped. Not by law, not by map, but by the road itself, by the rain that pressed down, cold and precise, like a heartbeat I could not escape. I couldn't write in a logbook. My pen refused, but the words formed anyway. Names, times, coordinates, events I hadn't yet witnessed, yet had seen again and again. Highway 92 recorded me as much as I recorded it. The figures moved closer, imperceptibly, but enough that I could feel the air bend around them. The crash repeated once more. Tires twisted, metal shrieked, steam hissed, and I, the deputy, swore silently to myself that I would not leave, because I couldn't, and the same crash would happen again tonight, and tomorrow, and the night after that, forever. I was on Highway 92, dead route, assigned to witness nothing but repetition, and I was already late. The rain hadn't let up, not once. I kept the wipers on high, but the water smeared across the windshield like quicksilver, and the fog clung to the edges of the road, turning the world into something liquid and unsteady. The northbound curve of Dead Route 92 was ahead, and I already knew what I would see. But this time there were voices. I heard them before I saw them. Faint at first, carried in the wind and the static of the cruiser's radio. Snippets of words. Fragments. Whispers, really. Don't stop. Don't leave, please. The voice was female. No. Several voices, overlapping. Some male, some female, young, old, and all begging me not to stop. I froze, hands gripping the wheel until the knuckles went white. The rain pattered against the roof. The words came again, softer, insistent. Please, keep going, don't look back. I could feel my chest tighten. It wasn't panic. Not exactly. It was recognition. Like the voice belonged somewhere it shouldn't. Like it had crossed into this world without permission. And now it wanted me to do something I didn't understand. I turned the headlights toward the shoulder, and there they were. Silhouettes standing by the wrecked car. The same one I had seen countless nights before. And yet, these figures were different. Faces turned toward me, eyes hollow, staring, but not empty. They held memories, regrets, a terror I could feel radiating outward. I stepped out of the cruiser. Water ran down my sleeves. soaking into my uniform. The smell of wet asphalt and oil and something metallic filled the air. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining it, but the voices were real, wrapping around me, curling into my ears like smoke. Please, don't help us, don't try. One of the figures stepped forward, a woman mid-30s, hair plastered to her face by the rain. She looked at me directly, eyes impossibly dark, and I felt my stomach drop. There was nothing alive about her, and yet she moved like she was breathing, like she could be touched. Please, you'll only make it worse, she whispered, her lips barely moving. But the sound came as clearly as my own heartbeat. I opened my mouth. I can help you. I can... No. Stop. Another voice, male this time, low and hoarse, but with a sharpness that cut through the rain. Don't save us. Don't stop for us. It's not what it looks like. I took a cautious step forward. My boots squelched in the waterlogged dirt. The car loomed behind them, twisted, glass shattered, metal bent at impossible angles. And then it hit me. Every detail was exact. The same exact car. The same exact damage. And yet, these were survivors, not victims. But they weren't living either. Not in the way I understood living. Why? Why are you here? I asked, voice trembling. They looked at me, all of them, and it was like seeing my own reflection in fractured glass. Their eyes begged, pleaded, but not for help. They wanted me to move, to leave, to keep going. You can't stop here. Not tonight. Not ever. You'll only join us. I shivered. My hands shook. I wanted to retreat, to get back into the cruiser, to flee this place and pretend it didn't exist. But my feet felt rooted to the ground. I couldn't move. And in that frozen moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to accept before. These people had been me, or would be me, or some version of every deputy, every witness, every soul caught by this road. The rain fell harder, striking the asphalt with rhythm that mimicked the crash, the endless, repeating crash I had witnessed night after night. And the survivors, they spoke in past tense. Every word was a warning wrapped in grief. Don't stop, don't even try, we're already gone. I swallowed, my throat dry, my voice cracked. Gone where? The woman tilted her head to the road, to the night, to what waits when the rain falls and the curve comes alive. You think you can rescue us? You think you can leave? I felt the wind push against me, strong, unnatural, carrying the smell of burning rubber and wet leaves. The rain intensified, and with it, the whispers. Now there were more voices, hundreds, overlapping, crying, pleading, warning. And yet, beneath the noise, there was a strange calm, a rhythm I didn't want to be part of but couldn't escape. I tried the radio. Static, only static. And then a whisper, intimately close, turn around, or stay forever. I glanced at the wreck. The car pulsed faintly, the headlights dimly glowing despite being dead for decades. And then I noticed movement inside. Not people, something else. Shadows curling, flickering, like smoke confined in metal. My stomach lurched, and yet the survivors didn't reach toward it. They stepped aside, watching me, their faces mournful, desperate, pleading. You can't help us. Only make it worse. One said. I wanted to argue, to insist I could fix this, I could save someone, anyone. But the logic in their eyes made my brain stumble. They were trapped. I could see the roads I'd patrolled, the crashes I'd witnessed, and the relentless repetition. And now I understood the road demanded observation, demanded submission. Any interference, any attempt to alter the events, only drew you in deeper. I stepped back, heart hammering. The rain ran down my face and into my collar. I could hear them whispering again, closer this time, almost inside my head. Names, dates, places. My own name, my father's, my brother's. Names I knew, names I didn't. All interwoven with the sound of metal tearing. Tires skidding in the steady, unyielding rain. You have to keep driving. A voice urged. Do not stop. Do not leave. Do not question. Do not try to save. You will vanish if you step into the wreck. I swallowed. My hands trembled as I gripped the door handle of the cruiser. The figures remained still, watching, waiting, not threatening, not malevolent, just insisting. They were guides, warning me of what I could not yet comprehend. I realized in the truth I had been avoiding. This was not about victims or rescue. It was about control, about the road bending around those who thought they could intervene. The survivors were warnings, echoes of every deputy who had come before, every soul who had tried to make sense of the crash, to save someone, to do right, and they had failed, or survived, only to exist in this in-between state, pleading for the next to understand. The rain's rhythm shifted, faster, louder, pounding in time with my pulse. I felt the pavement under my boots tremble. The fog swirled unnaturally, forming shapes, cars, people, faceless figures that stretched and contracted with a thunderous downpour. And through it all, the survivors whispered. Their tones shifted from pleading to insistence, almost chanting now. Drive, drive, drive. I stumbled back into the cruiser. Engine started with a roar that seemed louder than the storm itself. The windshield fogged as I pressed the wipers to maximum, and then I moved, slowly at first, then faster. The road ahead stretched endlessly, curving into the fog, the rain washing everything in silver light. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figures remained at the curve, watching, not fading, not disappearing, just present, reminders of what awaited anyone who stopped, anyone who tried to alter the rhythm. I gripped the wheel and whispered to myself, though I wasn't sure it was for me or for them. I understand. I won't stop. And in that instant, I realized the storm, the curve, the rain, the wreck, the voices, they weren't here to be fixed. They existed to be witnessed. And if I truly wanted to survive, I would have to keep moving. Not forward, not backward, just moving. The night stretched on. The rain never ceased. And the dead route remained endless, repeating. A loop of accidents and whispers, of survivors who refused help, and a deputy who now understood why. I looked back again. I didn't stop. I couldn't. And somewhere in the fog, I knew they were waiting, not to harm me, not to haunt me, but to remind me. The road takes only what it wants, and no kindness, no attempt at rescue could change that. The rain fell harder. The curve approached again, and I kept driving. The rain hadn't stopped, not for a single second since my shift began. It had a rhythm now, pounding against the roof of the cruiser like a second heartbeat, or maybe the first. I tried counting the drops once, just to distract myself, but it was impossible. They weren't regular. They fell at uneven intervals, as if the storm itself knew I was awake, alert, watching. I thought I understood Dead Route 92. I thought the pattern made sense. The same crashes, the same wrecks, the same survivors pleading not to be saved. But tonight was different. I knew it before I even saw it. The curve ahead, slick with rain, fog curling around it like smoke in a jar, held something waiting, something patient, something that obeyed rules older than I could imagine. I tried to turn off the headlights for a moment, to test it, just a flick, barely noticeable. The darkness swallowed the road ahead, but the curve glowed faintly, a wet, silver sheen that pulsed like a heartbeat. I could feel it from inside the car. It wasn't just asphalt. It was alive. A crash, identical to the countless ones I'd responded to, appeared just as I expected, lying on the shoulder. The same twisted vehicle, glass shattered, the smell of burnt rubber and oil rising the wet air. And the figures, they were there too, not moving, not blinking, just waiting, watching. I wanted to leave. I wanted to drive past the curve and back into the ordinary world, to let someone else handle it, but the road wouldn't allow it. I tried the turn signal. It didn't respond. I hit the brakes. Nothing. My fingers trembled as I fumbled with the gear shift. Neutral, reverse, forward, forward again. The engine roared, but the car refused to respond. It was as if the asphalt itself held me, pulling me closer to the wreck, to the survivors, to the endless repetition. And then the voices came, closer than ever. Not in the storm, not in the radio, not outside, but in my head, in my skull, insistent, growing louder. Their tones were different this time, not pleading, firm, demanding. Stop trying. You can't leave. You never could. I pressed my hands against my face. I thought I could wake myself, shake off the nightmare, convince my mind that it was rain, fog, shadow. But the road didn't care. I realized then what it meant. The curve, the rain, the crashes, the survivors. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I had intervened. I had tried to alter the rhythm. And that was when the road claimed authority. I tried to back up. The steering wheel wouldn't turn. The tires spun uselessly in the waterlogged gravel. And the figures, oh, the figures, they shifted ever so slightly. Just enough for me to know they were aware, not passive. A subtle lean here, a head tilt there, watching me, measuring me. Do not interfere, the female voice whispered, close to my ear. I spun, half expecting someone to be there. But nothing, just rain, just fog, just me, and the pulse of the curve beneath the tires. I tried to call it in. Radio, my voice. Dispatch, I need static, only static. Then, don't call, don't ask. You are already part of it. Part of it. The words pressed against my skull like cold water, and I felt it then. The road wasn't just a route. It wasn't just asphalt and paint. It had rules. Laws that existed before I was born, before anyone patrolled it. And it didn't tolerate intervention. The figures stepped forward, not aggressively, not angrily, but with purpose. Each movement precise, deliberate, and with every step, the wreck seemed to pulse, the metal bending imperceptibly, glass shimmering as if alive. I swallowed, my throat dry. My voice, when I managed to croak it, was almost a whisper. I'm just trying to help. The man, one of the survivors from countless nights, raised a hand. He didn't touch me, didn't need to. The gesture alone stilled me. His eyes bore into mine, black as wet asphalt. Helping changes nothing, he said, tone soft but final. You cannot say what the road claims. You can only obey. Obey. The word echoed in my chest, deep and heavy. I wanted to argue to resist, but my body refused. Muscles locked, adrenaline surged. Yet I was frozen. Even the rain felt heavier now, pressing down on my shoulders, my arms, my thoughts. I remembered the other nights. Every crash I had seen, every survivor who pleaded, every curve I thought I could bend with my presence. All illusions of control, all lies. The road had never let anyone leave. Anyone who tried disappeared. Or worse. I pressed my hands to the wheel. Nothing. Forward motion was automatic now, slow, inexorable, pulling me closer to the wreck. The survivors watched. Not angry, not cruel. Observing, enforcing. Do not stop, the female voice said. Do not turn back. Do not leave. Not ever. I glanced at the wreck. Rain poured off its hood, pooling in twisted crevices, reflecting the dim glow of the fog. The curves of metal shimmered unnaturally, as if breathing. Shadows twisted inside, forming shapes that weren't quite human, weren't quite alive. The smell of burnt rubber, oil, and something rotting filled the car, as if the wreck itself exhaled. I wanted to look away. I wanted to escape, my heart hammering. I realized there was nowhere to go. The road itself had become a cage, its rules absolute, its law unyielding. The survivors whispered again, their voices overlapping now, chanting almost, "Obey, obey, obey." I shivered, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I tried braking again. Tires skidded uselessly. The curve approached, pulsing, shimmering, alive. And then, as if in response to my fear, the road changed. Slight dips, subtle shifts in the asphalt, guiding me into position. I understood then. I was no longer patrolling. I was part of the law, an enforcer, a witness, a component of the night's inevitability. I remembered every night's pattern. The crashes, the survivors, the curve. I realized that leaving, ignoring, intervening, it was never allowed. Every attempt to act against the road, against its rhythm, only pulled you deeper. And tonight, I had finally crossed that line. Rain pelted the windshield harder. Thunder cracked somewhere distant, or maybe not distant at all. Shadows stretched along the road, elongated by the fog in my own racing mind. I was moving now, slowly, guided, trapped, forward, into inevitability. Into law I had never agreed to, but now enforced. The voices softened, almost approving. You understand. You see. You know. You belong. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I could only grip the wheel, watch the wreck, watch the survivors, and drive. The curve pulsed beneath the tires. The rain hammered. The wind carried whispers and names and regrets. And I moved because there was no choice. No choice. And then, beyond the wreck, the next curve appeared. Silver, wet, alive, waiting, watching. I felt it pull at me, tug at my bones, my thoughts, my very sense of self. And I understood intervention was impossible, escape meaningless. The law of this road was absolute, eternal, and I was just its newest deputy. The rain never stopped. The curve never ended. The survivors whispered forever. And I drove because that was the only way to survive. Only to continue. Only to obey. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Only fog. Only rain. Only the weight of inevitability pressing down like water. And somewhere in the darkness, I knew the road had claimed me. Not cruelly. Not violently. Simply, utterly. Lawfully. I did not look back again. I could not. The rain fell harder. The curve stretched ahead. And I drove. The boxes arrived without warning. No note. No record. Just boxes. Unmarked. Stacked in the corner of the storage bay where I spent most of my nights cataloging old evidence. I stared at them for a long moment, trying to place a town to go with them. There wasn't one. Not in any of the official maps. Not in any of the reports I'd been sent. I should have called someone. I should have reported it. But my curiosity was a weight too heavy to resist. My hands itched to open the first one. I tried to shake it off, rationalizing. Evidence shipments came from towns all over the county. Sometimes abandoned towns. Sometimes places barely remembered. Nothing unusual there, except I remembered the name scribbled on the shipping label. Tiny, almost smudged, Gallows Hollow. I froze. I had read about Gallows Hollow once. It was in a report, decades old, a town that disappeared from records. Not a fire, not a flood, nothing explained it. One day it existed. The next, nothing. No census. No police files. Not even a dot on the map. And yet, here it was, sending boxes to me. I pushed one toward me. The wood of the crate slick with dust, and something else. Something damp. My fingers lingered on the surface. I could feel tension. Not mine. Not entirely. A quiet pull, like the crate was aware I was considering it, inviting me. I opened the lid. Inside were everyday things. Cups, a broom, a coat, a child's toy car. Nothing extraordinary at first glance, but each item hummed with the residue of lives lived or forgotten. I picked up the toy car. It was worn, the paint chipped. Tiny scratches marred the metal, but there was no dust inside it. No sign it had been untouched for decades. I moved to the next box. Same story. Plates with patterns that no longer existed in stores. A calendar from a year I didn't recognize. Letters without addresses. I opened one carefully, fingertips brushing the ink words. Do not look for us. I dropped it. My heart jumped. Just words. Written decades ago. Maybe preserved inside the box. But my voice caught in my throat. My eyes darted around the storage bay. Shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. Flickering in rhythm with the humming fluorescent lights. I should have stopped there. I should have called it in. But I couldn't. Each box seemed to feed some strange need inside me. Curiosity, fear, awe. Something impossible to separate. I opened another crate. This one smelled faintly of wet earth, like soil from a freshly dug grave. Inside were children's shoes. Tiny, polished, but with footprints etched faintly into the leather, as if someone had walked through mud while wearing them. I traced the prints with my finger. Nothing happened. Nothing moved. But I felt it, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against me. I backed away. Just boxes. I told myself. Just relics. Nothing more. But the air in the room had changed. The temperature dropped, subtle at first, then sharply, until I could see my breath curl in the fluorescent light. A low vibration ran under my feet, almost like a heartbeat. Not mine. I couldn't place it at first, then realized the crates were humming. Not mechanical, not electrical, but alive or aware. Something old, patient, waiting. I tried to focus on cataloging the items. I pulled out a faded photo. A family standing in front of a small clapper house. Smiles frozen, eyes bright. I felt a ripple in my chest, a longing I didn't understand. But as I stared, the faces blurred. The children's smiles stretched too wide. The parents' eyes hollowed. The photo shook in my hands as though breathing. I dropped it back into the box. My hands trembled. I considered leaving the room entirely. Go home. Sleep? Pretend none of this existed. But something kept me rooted. The boxes called to me. Not in a voice, not in words, but in the quiet insistence of the forgotten. I opened another crate. This one held paperwork. Ledgers, census forms, town records. I leafed through them, careful not to tear the brittle pages. Names I recognized, names I didn't. Some dated decades back, some were from the past week. Every entry bore a weight I couldn't explain. There were residents who hadn't existed, addresses on streets that no longer appeared on any map, occupations that didn't make sense. I read one aloud without thinking. James Harrow, 14, Oak Street teacher, deceased. But the line after it shook me more. Resides at 14 Oak Street, actively participating in town council, current date. I blinked. My eyes scanned again. The ledger was in order, typed neatly. No errors. The town existed and didn't exist at the same time. My stomach twisted. I set the ledger down, heart pounding. Then I heard it, the faintest whisper, so soft I thought it was my own imagination. Thank you for noticing. I spun. Empty room. Only the boxes. Only the shadows stretching across the walls, curling in corners where no light reached. My breath came fast. My hands shook. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't tear myself away from the crates. I knew that leaving without cataloging every item would be wrong, punishable, in a way I didn't yet understand. I opened a small jewelry box. Inside were rings, delicate, tarnished, yet polished as though someone had worn them yesterday. I lifted one to the light. Tiny engraving inside. We wait. The words burn on my mind. Not paper. Not ink. Not voice. Just, we wait. I dropped the ring. My fingers recoiled. But I couldn't stop. I opened another crate. Plates. Mugs. A coffee pot. Nothing unusual. But the moment I picked up the mug, I felt it. A presence. Not a thought. Not a memory. Something alive. Cold and patient. It brushed against my consciousness and left a mark I couldn't describe. I stepped back. The boxes weren't just items. They were fragments of a life that refused to be forgotten. A town that refused to die. Every object held a memory. A pulse. A small act of existence echoing through time. I heard footsteps then. Behind me. Slow. Deliberate. Not my own. I froze. My hands hovered over crate lids. The footsteps moved closer. Not across the concrete floor. Across my mind. My skull reverberated with each soft step. I see you, the whisper said. Clearer this time. Closer. Older. Not human. I turned. Nothing. Just shadows. But the boxes trembled, subtle at first, then violently, as if acknowledging the voice I couldn't see. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. My pulse raced. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave. But how could I? Every instinct told me the boxes, the town needed me. I could almost hear it breathing through the objects, watching, waiting for me to notice, to record, to acknowledge. I opened the last crate. Inside, a single chair, wooden, plain, but I knew somehow it was not a chair for sitting. It was a seat for watching. I approached it, hard hammering. I placed a hand on the back. It vibrated faintly, humming. I felt eyes on me, from every direction, from nowhere. I realized then, Cataloging the boxes was not a job. It was a ritual, a way to honor a town erased from maps, from memory, from existence itself. And the moment I finished, I would belong to it too. I backed away slowly, stepping on the concrete floor that no longer felt solid beneath my feet. I tried to call someone, tried to put it out of my mind, but the boxes were patient, the whispers patient, the town patient, and I understood in a way I couldn't articulate. There was no leaving, there was only seeing, only noticing, only remembering, and I had just begun. The rain outside the bay window tapped against the metal roof. It sounded like applause, or warning. I didn't know which, but I stayed cataloging, noting, recording the boxes from a town erased, carrying every memory, every whisper, every fragment of existence, waiting to be acknowledged. And I realized with a cold certainty that I was part of the waiting now. I couldn't stop thinking about the boxes, not because they were unusual exactly, but because they remembered every object, every scrap of wood, every chip plate carried echoes I couldn't ignore. I tried to catalog them like normal evidence, making notes, scanning barcodes, labeling items. But the moment I touched something, it breathed. Not literally, of course. Not air, but life, memory, a fragment of someone's guilt or fear or longing. The first box I opened that night smelled faintly of smoke. Inside were papers, reports of disputes, minor crimes, small-town dramas. Names I didn't recognize. Crimes I'd never heard of. But as I ran my fingers over the edges, I felt it, a tug at my chest, like someone had pressed a hand against my heart. And then the whispers began. Soft. So soft I almost thought they were my own thoughts. You ignored it. I froze, hand hovering over a ledger. My skin prickled. The voice wasn't in the room, wasn't outside. It was in me. Every hair on my arm stood straight. My pulse hit a rhythm I couldn't control. I whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. I opened another crate. A child's drawing. Crayon on line paper. A house, a tree, a figure with no face. My eyes traced the lines, and I felt a surge of sorrow so sharp I had to sit on the concrete floor. And the whisper came again, almost apologetic. "You could have saved us." I gripped the drawing, terrified and transfixed. It was just a drawing, but the weight behind the words was real. The town's memory pressed against me. Every box, every item, every splintered piece would carry some fragment of a life that had ended in pain, in error, in oversight, guilt from people long gone, or maybe from people like me who hadn't noticed, hadn't acted. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was my mind. Maybe long nights and dusty crates and old evidence were playing tricks on me. But then the cup shattered. I hadn't dropped it. It wasn't even near the edge of the crate. It shattered in place, spraying fragments across the floor. And the whisper followed, sharp and cold. "Why didn't you answer?" I backed up, heart racing. The room felt impossibly small now, walls inching closer. My hands shook as I reached for another box. I could hear something brushing against the floor, soft steps that shouldn't exist, movements that didn't make sense. Inside this box were personal items. Keys, a comb, a watch frozen at 3:47. I picked up the watch. The hand spun backward for a moment, then stopped, pointed straight at midnight. I could feel the memories within it, and the whisper was no longer soft. "You left me." I staggered, dropping the watch. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed unnaturally. I could feel the presence moving between boxes, brushing past my mind, pressing, waiting. A small wooden figurine caught my eye. A man, carved crudely, one arm missing. I picked it up. Its weight was heavier than it should be. And then I understood it wasn't just memory. It was guilt. Each object carried the failures of lives, the choices people didn't make, the consequences they couldn't undo. And now, they were reaching through the years, pressing them onto me. I tried to put the figurine back, but my fingers froze. I could see it moving slightly, subtle, almost imperceptible. Not real, not alive, but aware. "You ignored me," it whispered. I fell to my knees, chest heaving, mind screaming to step back, to leave, to tell myself this was impossible. But I couldn't. Every box hummed now. Every plate, every piece of paper. Every toy vibrated faintly. They were all waiting, watching, judging, and they knew I saw them, knew I recognized the guilt they carried. I opened another crate, a jacket worn and frayed. Inside the pocket, a folded letter. I pulled it out with shaking hands. The ink was faded but legible. I tried to warn him. I tried to stop it. And why didn't you? I felt a pang deep in my chest. Not mine, not personal, but intimate, like someone's soul had pressed itself into the letter and was now reaching out to me. I couldn't read more. I had to step back. I had to breathe, but the whispers followed. You could have done something. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but every object in the room seemed to shift subtly, sliding closer. Not physically, not like gravity was changing, but in perception. Boxes angled just slightly toward me. Shadows elongated unnaturally. The floor seemed to lean, and with each step I took backward, the whispers grew stronger. A ceramic plate quivered in its box. Then a mug rattled. A toy soldier fell over. And all at once, the room's temperature plummeted. My breath came out in white puffs. You see us, the voices said, together now, overlapping. You hear us. You feel our failures. I felt like I was suffocating. My ears rang. My head throbbed. I wanted to leave, to step outside, to escape the oppressive weight of unseen guilt pressing against me. But I couldn't move. My legs were rooted to the concrete. My eyes traced the boxes, the crates, the objects. Every item shimmered faintly, as if acknowledging me, as if aware I had noticed them. I picked up a pair of old shoes. A man's shoes, polished, the soles worn from long miles. And suddenly I felt it. The footsteps, the days, the miles he had walked, the choices he had made that led to tragedy. And with the memory came the whisper. Could you have stopped it? I dropped the shoes. The sound echoed impossibly long, like a memory of the floor itself had been disturbed. I turned toward another crate. Inside, a child's blanket, faded and torn. I lifted it, and I felt the child's last moments. A fear I couldn't erase, a panic I could not understand. You left me, the whisper pressed into my skull. You left me to fade. I staggered, overwhelmed, chest tight, mind spiraling. The whispers weren't just from the objects. They were coming from me, through me, around me. The air vibrated with memory and guilt, pressing into every sense. The boxes were alive in their own way, alive with the echoes of lives that could not rest. And they knew I had seen. They knew I had cataloged. They knew I had acknowledged them. I realized then, with a weight heavier than any object, that I wasn't just cataloging evidence anymore. I was listening. I was remembering. I was holding the failures of the vanished town. And if I left, even for a moment, the weight would follow. Another whisper, softer this time, almost tender. Thank you for seeing us. I sank to the floor, surrounded by boxes that hummed with memory, shadows that whispered guilt. And though I could have left, though I could have closed the lids and walked away, I knew the town, the lost souls, the objects themselves would not allow it. I was part of their inventory now, their witness, their keeper. I sat there for hours, cataloging, listening, acknowledging. Each object a story, each story a plea. And as the rain tapped against the storage bay's metal roof, soft and relentless, I understood fully what it meant. Memory never fades. Guilt never rests. And some towns, even erased from maps, never stop speaking. I knew I was alone. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to tell myself the station was empty, that the files were simply old, dusty, forgotten evidence waiting for someone to sort them. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Not after what I'd seen in the last few nights. The files were no longer just records. They weren't just documents or fingerprints or case numbers. They were alive in a way I couldn't explain. The town itself had been erased. Every name crossed off maps. Every address vanished from memory. And yet the evidence remained stubbornly present. Not just present, but insistent. They were telling me stories the way no living witness could. I picked up a folder marked case 23 to 91, careful with my gloves. Inside were photographs of a home burned to its frame. An empty doorway hanging like a grin in the blackened wood. A woman's name was typed at the bottom, Elaine Roberts. But she didn't exist anywhere else. Not in reports, not in census records, not in obituaries. And yet, the evidence whispered her existence into my mind. Her life folded into my consciousness. I felt it immediately. The heat of the fire, the acrid sting of smoke, the weight of panic pressing into my chest. I could see her running through the hallway, her hand against the wall, furniture falling around her, the ceiling collapsing. She didn't scream. She didn't need to. Her fear burned loud enough to echo across time, and the folder pressed itself into my hands, as if the paper wanted me to feel. I looked around the room and realized the truth. The files were the witnesses. The fingerprints, the photographs, the notes. They weren't just records. They were memory, preserved, pleading. Crimes without suspects weren't unsolved because we couldn't find the perpetrator. They were unsolved because the perpetrator had never been alive, never existed. The town itself had committed them. The station had collected proof, and the evidence remembered everything. I opened another folder, marked Case 47-03. Inside were photographs of a car that had rolled off the highway, smashed against a guardrail. 2 bodies, perfectly preserved in the pictures, faces unmarked but frozen in that final, impossible instant. The names were typed neatly. Harold Kane and Margaret Kane. I had never heard of them. No records existed. But as I held the folder, I could see their last moments clearly. I could hear the metal crunching, the glass shattering, the silence that followed. The folder itself trembled slightly in my hands, and I felt the faint pulse of life, or perhaps death, beneath the paper. It was overwhelming. My chest ached, my head spun. The evidence wasn't content to sit quietly on the shelves. It wanted acknowledgement. It wanted to be seen. And the more I looked, the more I understood it had chosen me. I wasn't just cataloging these crimes. I was listening to them. I was the one who could hear what had been forgotten, what had been erased. I set down the folder, trying to shake off the feeling, but it didn't leave, not in the slightest. A soft shuffle echoed across the room, and I froze. There was no one there, not in sight, but I could sense movement among the shelves. Something had shifted, or maybe I had shifted. I couldn't tell anymore. The line between myself and the evidence was thinning. Another folder caught my eye, one lying face down on the floor. I knelt to pick it up. Case 12-67, a burglary. But the photographs were wrong. The angles didn't match reality. The shadows in the pictures were too long, the walls too narrow. And then I noticed it. In every frame I could see myself, not as I was, but as I would be, watching, cataloging, witnessing. My own presence was etched into the crime itself, and the whisper followed me then, soft but clear, emanating from the paper. You are the witness. I staggered back. My mind tried to process it. How could this be? I had never been there. These crimes had happened decades ago, and yet somehow the evidence was linking me, folding me into the memory of the acts themselves. I could feel the weight of countless failures pressing against my chest. The paper in my hands throbbed like a heartbeat, syncing with my own. I tried to set the folder down, but it resisted, clinging to me, insisting that I look further. I flipped it open and found handwritten notes, scribbled in haste, describing details no reporter recorded. The handwriting wasn't familiar, yet somehow intimate, as if the station itself had reached through time to instruct me. You should have seen it coming, the whisper said. I didn't know if it was the evidence speaking or if my own mind was cracking. The folder was warm now, pulsing faintly, like it held the essence of the crimes it documented. Each photograph, each fingerprint, each scribbled note wasn't just proof. It was a memory of the act, the guilt of the perpetrator, the lingering horror of the victim. And now it was mine to hold. I moved to another shelf, drawn to a thin stack of papers tied with string. Case 89-44, a poisoning. The victim's name was typed at the bottom, again untraceable. Franklin Myers. I opened the papers and the smell hit me. Faint, chemical, almost like almonds. My stomach turned. I could see him drinking the liquid, small drops slipping down his throat, the room spinning. I could feel his confusion, his trust, his slow realization betrayal. The evidence wasn't just describing it. It was making me feel it. as if the act was happening again through my own body. I dropped the stack, gasping. I tried to step back, tried to convince myself it was my imagination. But the room was alive with whispers now, low murmurs overlapping. Every piece of evidence was speaking, some softly, some urgently, some accusingly. It all blended together into a single, suffocating presence. You witness. You hold us. You are the proof. The voices said, layered and insistent. I pressed my hands to my head. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to feel it. But I couldn't stop. The evidence had chosen me. It had folded my life into its memory. I wasn't merely observing anymore. I was participating, whether I liked it or not. I picked up another folder. Trembling, the edges slick with my sweat. Case 34 to 12. Robbery. Assault. Names I didn't know. Places that no longer existed. And in each photograph, each scribbled note, I could sense a thread connecting all the victims and all the crimes. The perpetrator was impossible, abstract. It wasn't a person. It was the town itself. Its absence, its erasure, had left the crimes behind as if to remind anyone who came after that something had existed here. Something that had known fear, anger, pain. And I was the only one left to bear witness. I sank to the floor, surrounded by the evidence, hands shaking. The folders hummed faintly, whispering in unison now. A chorus of memory and accusation. You see us. You know us. You cannot leave us. I realized that the sheriff I had been, the lawkeeper, the observer, the enforcer, was gone. Only the witness remained. The evidence had claimed me, entwined me with the crimes, made me a part of the memories I had cataloged. And the station, silent and still in the cold night, pressed closer around me, guiding me, shaping me, binding me to the impossible truth. The evidence was alive, and I was now its keeper. Outside, the rain continued to fall, soft against the roof, unremarkable. But inside every box, every folder, every object whispered with intent, carrying memories no living witness could recall. And I knew with absolute certainty that I would never leave this station unchanged. I was the witness, and the crimes without suspect were mine to remember. I thought I had seen everything. I thought the folders, the photographs, the whispers, they were the worst the station could offer. But I was wrong. It started with the locker, a simple metal locker at the far end of the evidence room, the kind you'd see in any station, scratched and dented from decades of use. I hadn't paid it much attention at first, just another storage space. But something about it made my skin prickle. It was colder than the rest of the room, and the hinges groaned under no weight at all. I approached it slowly, my hands shaking, and when I reached out to touch the handle, the air itself seemed to push back. The metal was slick, almost wet, and when I brushed my fingers over it, I felt a pulse, soft at first, then growing stronger. My own heartbeat quickened to match it. I pulled the door open. Inside was empty, or so I thought, but then I saw it, a tag, freshly printed, hanging from the lock mechanism. My name was on it, my full name, Sheriff, my name typed neatly, as if someone or something had anticipated my arrival here. I stared, frozen, feeling a cold weight settle over my chest. I stepped back. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe someone had left it here to scare me. But the station had been abandoned for years. There was no one here, no living soul. And yet there was my name, written as though I were the next exhibit, the final case to be logged. I tried to leave it alone. I told myself it was just paper, just a locker, just a coincidence. But the pulse I had felt earlier grew stronger. The locker creaked as if breathing. The room shifted in a way I couldn't place. Shadows stretching along the walls, bending the light of a single flickering bulb. And then the whisper started again, soft at first, almost imperceptible. You are next. I spun around, heart hammering. No one, nothing, just the shelves, the folders, the endless evidence. But the sound of my own name lingered in the air. It wasn't coming from any direction. It was inside my head, a voice I had never heard. Yet it carried certainty, authority. It was the station speaking, and it wanted me. I glanced back at the locker. Slowly, impossibly, the door began to close on its own. My fingers shot out, trying to stop it, but the metal was heavier than it should have been, like trying to stop water with your hands. It slammed shut with a hollow clang that echoed through the room, the sound reverberating in my chest. And then, with a soft click, it locked itself. The tag swung gently. My name glinted under the flickering light. Case closed on me, the station seemed to say without words. The realization hit me with full force. I wasn't just cataloging the crimes anymore. I had become the crime. The evidence had turned on me. The station had claimed its final exhibit. I stumbled backward, my back hitting a shelf. The folders around me trembled, rattling as though shivering from some unseen cold. I could feel the weight of every unsolved case pressing into me, the memory of each victim, each act of violence, each betrayal, folding itself around my mind. And at the center of it all was me, my own fear, my own presence, cataloged and sealed by the station itself. I tried to open the locker. My fingers slipped over the handle. It wouldn't budge. Panic welled up in my throat. I pounded on the door. Nothing. I screamed my name, hoping for an answer from the empty room. But the only sound was the rain outside, soft and constant against the roof. And then the whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me. You see us. You know us. You are one of us. I fell to my knees. My mind was a storm, memories colliding with impossible visions. I could see the faces of those I'd cataloged, their eyes turning toward me, accusing, pleading. The fire victims, the highway deaths, the poisonings. I could feel their final moments press into my body, and now the station added one more. Mine, the sheriff who came to witness, to record, to remember. It was now me who had become a memory, trapped inside the walls I had thought were neutral, passive. The air shifted, and I could hear it. Soft footsteps moving around the room. I couldn't see them, but I could sense them. The station was alive. It was aware. It was adjusting. The lockers, the shelves, the folders. They were all in motion, shifting subtly, creating a labyrinth that didn't exist a minute ago. And at the center of it, the locker that held my name. I backed away, trying to get to the door, to leave, to run. But the hallway outside seemed longer, darker, uninviting. The lights flickered, shadows dancing in ways that didn't match the geometry of the room. And I understood I couldn't leave. Not anymore. The station had chosen me. It had marked me. My fate was sealed. I sank against the wall, my hands pressed over my face. I could hear the whispers in my ears now, hundreds of them overlapping, telling me what I already knew. You are the witness. You are the record. You are the case. The folders on the shelves rattled, shaking as if in a gust of wind. But there was no wind. The station itself breathed. I could feel it exhaling, inhaling, drawing me closer to the locker, to the evidence, to the finality of my own presence. I dared to glance back. The locker gleamed in the dim light, perfectly ordinary yet impossibly alive. The tag with my name seemed to pulse, synchronized with my own heartbeat. I realized that the station didn't just want me. It had already taken me. I was no longer the person who had arrived. I was a case file, a living memory, a record that could not be erased. I screamed into the empty room. My voice bounced back, warped, distorted, as if the station itself were speaking through me. My knees gave out, and I slid to the floor, overwhelmed by the gravity of it all. Every crime I had cataloged pressed into me, every story, every photograph, every whisper of the forgotten. And now my story was folded into theirs, inseparable, inescapable. I could feel the locker calling to me, not with sound, not with force, but with inevitability. It was my place, my purpose, and yet it terrified me. I wanted to resist, to run, to scream, but the evidence had my mind. My body obeyed the rhythm of the station, drawn slowly, inexorably toward the metal door that bore my name. I sat before it, breathing ragged, and I knew the truth. This was never a station for justice. It had never been about law, or investigation, or order. It was a vessel, a repository, a tomb for those who once held authority. And now it had claimed me. The sheriff who came to record history had become part of it. The final exhibit in a gallery of horrors that time had tried to erase. The whispers crescendoed, voices overlapping, some urgent, some mournful, some accusatory. You are remembered. You are cataloged. You are ours. The locker remained still. My fingers hovered over the handle. I wanted to open it, wanted to tear my name from its grasp, but I couldn't. It was welded to my presence, my existence, my inevitability. The station had integrated me into its memory, folded my life into the endless archive of crimes, accidents, disappearances, and horrors that no living witness could ever recount. I slid against the wall, staring at the locker. Outside, the rain fell softly, washing the world clean and different. Inside, I had become part of something eternal, something that remembered everything, forgave nothing, and demanded nothing less than absolute acknowledgement. I touched the locker gently, feeling the pulse, the weight, the inevitability. My name was there, the final case, sealed, and I understood that I would never leave, never escape. I was cataloged, recorded, integrated, and in that final, quiet acceptance, I felt the last remnants of my former life slip away. I whispered my own name once, barely audible. The locker seemed to hum in reply, and for the first time, I felt seen, not as a sheriff, not as a man, but as a record, a witness, a memory that could not die. And somewhere in the silence that followed, I realized the truth. The station had never needed lawkeepers. It only needed witnesses. And now I was permanent. I had walked these halls 1,000 times. Every creak of the floorboards, every scuff on the marble, every echo of my own boots. I knew them all. I worked the night shift at the courthouse, alone except for the occasional filing clerk or security officer during the day. But nights were mine. Empty corridors, the smell of old wood and ink, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. It was quiet, too quiet sometimes, but I could handle quiet, until I found the floor. It wasn't on the blueprints, not officially, not in the records. The building plans, archived meticulously by the city, showed the basement ending at level B2. That was the lowest level I had ever patrolled. Or so I thought. I stumbled onto it by accident. I had been checking the lower halls, making my usual rounds, flashlight in hand. The beam caught a corner I didn't recognize. A narrow door, heavy metal, unmarked. I'd never seen it before. Not in the morning. Not on any of my previous night shifts. And that was impossible. I knew this building like I knew the back of my hand. The door handle was cold. I hesitated, feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Something about the metal made the air feel heavier, denser, like the darkness beyond it was pushing back. I didn't want to open it, and yet I had to. Curiosity has a way of bending your will, even when fear roots itself in your chest. The door swung open easily, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The steps were stone, older than the courthouse itself, worn smooth by time I had never accounted for. The air smelled different down there, damp, earthy, with a faint tang of rust. The lights from above didn't reach far, and my flashlight felt pitiful against the black that swallowed the stairwell. I stepped down slowly. Each footfall echoed as though the stairwell had never known another sound. My hands were slick with sweat despite the chill, and I could feel the walls closing in, narrowing the space as I descended. The farther down I went, the quiet of the courthouse became above. The usual hum of pipes, the occasional distant laughter or call from the day's shifts, all gone. At the bottom, the flashlight revealed a hallway, long, narrow, impossibly straight. The walls were bare concrete, and the floor was covered in dust, so thick it clung to my shoes. No signs, no doors leading to offices or storage. Just a corridor that had no reason to exist. I ran my fingers along the wall. The concrete was smooth, unnatural, almost polished. And then I saw them. Footprints. They were fresh. Not mine. Not from shoes. Exactly. More like impressions in the dust, shallow but deliberate, as if someone had walked slowly down the corridor. But there was no one there. I knew the building. I had seen it empty, every day and every night. I should have been alone. I followed the footprints, heart hammering, every nerve screaming. The further I walked, the colder it became, not just on my skin, but inside my chest, a chill that settled over my bones. I turned the corner, expecting maybe a storage room, a utility closet, something mundane. but the hallway ended abruptly. A blank concrete wall stared back at me. No footprints continued. No doors. Nothing. I shone my flashlight along the wall, running my fingers over it. Solid. No seams. No hidden panels. Yet the footprints, impossible illogical, had stopped here, right in front of this wall. And I swear, in the beam of my light, I could see a shimmer, a slight distortion in the concrete, as if the wall itself was breathing, alive in some way. I took a step back. Something whispered, not in words, not in sound, but in sensation. A subtle pull, like a finger brushing against inside my mind. I shook my head, telling myself it was just nerves. That was the courthouse settling, pipes shifting, air moving. But I knew better. The air down here didn't move. Not naturally. I turned to leave. The stairs were right there, but the hallway had changed. The door at the top of the stairs, the only way out, was gone. Just a wall, like the corridor had swallowed it. My flashlight flickered. I cursed under my breath, trying to remain calm. I could trace my steps. I could find another way back. I had to. I turned back toward the blank wall, and the shimmer returned. This time it pulsed, slowly, like a heartbeat, and I saw it, an outline. Human, not fully formed, but there, a figure pressed just behind the surface of the wall. Its features impossible to make out. I froze. The air thickened, pressing against my chest. My flashlight flickered again, then steadied. The figure was gone, but I could feel it, watching, waiting. I backed up, trying to keep my hand steady on the wall. Something wet brushed my arm. I jerked away. My flashlight fell to the floor and rolled, casting the hallway in a harsh, spinning light. Shadows stretched and contracted unnaturally, and I heard it again, the whisper, this time words. Why are you here? Not from anyone I could see, not from anywhere in the hallway. The voice was inside my skull, low, soft, and accusing. I ran to the stairs, or where I thought they were, and slammed my shoulder against the wall. Solid. Nothing. Panic surged. I could feel the floor beneath me pulse slightly, as if breathing. The air seemed to thicken even more, pressing at my lungs. I coughed. My mind raced. How could this be? How could a courthouse, my courthouse, high a floor no one had documented, no plans existed for, no doors to access it? How? A faint light appeared at the end of the hallway, dim, almost like fog catching a distant street lamp. I ran toward it. My footsteps echoed. I reached it and found another stairwell, not like the first. Wider, iron railings, steps that creaked under my weight. It led upward this time. Relief, maybe a way back. But the walls of the stairwell were etched. Marks, hundreds of them, scratched into the metal. Names, dates, numbers I couldn't read. They seemed to shift when I looked away, rearranging themselves as though documenting me, as though I had always been part of this. I climbed quickly. My hands grabbed the railing, my breath fogging the air. I reached the top and found another hallway, familiar and yet wrong. Papers littered the floor, office furniture stacked oddly, filing cabinets half open. Dust hung thick in the air, a faint smell of ink mold and something coppery, blood, maybe, filled my nostrils. I thought I recognized this hallway. I had walked it hundreds of times during the day, but the doors were wrong. The windows were gone, and the ceiling pulsed, faintly like a living thing. A sound, a shuffle barely audible, echoed behind me. I spun around, empty, but the whisper returned. You belong here. I stumbled back. My mind screamed to leave, to run, to escape. But I knew the truth before I even reached the door. The courthouse had never been a simple building. It had always been alive. It had hidden this floor for a reason. For decades it had waited. For me, I realized then that I hadn't discovered the floor. It had discovered me. It had been waiting in the darkness, breathing under my feet, watching, cataloging, shaping. And now I was here. I tried to push the thought away. I told myself I'd write a report. I'd say I found structural anomalies. I'd insist the building needed inspection. Anything to make sense of this. But the whispers didn't leave. They followed me up the stairs, down the hallway, across the floors I knew so well. And when I reached the first floor, the lobby, it was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of life. The chairs, the desks, the bulletin boards. They were there, yes, but silent, waiting, expectant. And I understood this floor wasn't the only secret. The courthouse held many, and it had only begun to reveal them to me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the lobby, listening to the soft hum of lights and the distant drip of water. The building seemed to sigh, shifting slightly under my feet. I realized then that leaving might not be as simple as walking out the front doors, that the courthouse, in all its orderly grandeur, had rules I did not understand, rules I had no choice but to obey. And somewhere deep in the walls, far below the blueprints, I knew the floor waited for me, patiently, like a predator, like a record keeper, like something alive. I walked slowly to the exit, flashlight trembling in my grip, whispering to myself that it was only a floor, just a floor, nothing more. But I knew it wasn't, and I knew it would be there tomorrow night, and the night after that, because it had found me, and I could not stop it. I thought I had seen the courthouse in every possible state. Empty halls, fluorescent hum, dust on the steps, the faint smell of old paper and disinfectant. But the holding cells, that floor changed everything. I never thought a building could feel alive, but walking past the heavy steel doors at night, I understood it. The air was thick, not just with dust, but with expectation. Shadows pulled in corners, almost tangible, like dark water pressing against the edges of the light. I had the keys in my hand. Routine check. Inspect the cells, make sure the locks held, and that there wasn't anyone lingering from an earlier arrest. My footsteps echoed against concrete walls, hollow and exaggerated. I reached the first row of cells and paused. The doors were closed, each lock turning smoothly under my hand. But when I peered inside, they were there, figures, sitting or standing quietly, each perfectly still, not moving, not blinking, but alive, almost alive. Their eyes met mine, unflinching. And yet, I knew these people weren't registered. They had never been booked. Their names didn't exist in any ledger. Their faces didn't match any record. And yet, they were prisoners. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my voice. Anyone in here need anything? I asked, though I knew the answer. Silence. Only the faint scuff of concrete shoes on floor, a whispering echo that didn't belong to me. I moved from cell to cell, keys jingling in my hand, flashlight trembling just slightly. Some of them leaned forward, heads tilted, almost curious. Others slumped against the wall, motionless, as if waiting. And the strangest part, I could feel their awareness, like the air around them hummed with attention, pulling at my thoughts, weighing on my chest. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe former detainees? Maybe I'd never processed the paperwork properly. Maybe it was an old, forgotten record. But then I checked the logs. Every name I could find for this night, for this floor, every record in the past 10 years, they didn't exist. And not just the recent ones. These cells have been empty for decades, according to the courthouse archives. The building was supposed to be standard, routine, orderly. But here it was defying every record, every plan, every logical thought I had. I tried to shake it off, walking the length of the row. One cell in particular drew my attention, a man or what resembled one, sitting upright on the narrow cot. His features were obscured by shadow, but his hands rested neatly on his knees. No restraints, no bars holding him beyond the door. I stepped closer. "Name?" I asked. My voice cracked. He didn't answer. He didn't move. And yet, I felt the weight of his presence, pressing down on me. The floor beneath my boots seemed to vibrate slightly, a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. My own pulse went erratic. I stepped back, suddenly aware that every other cell seemed to lean toward him, or maybe toward me. I checked the next cell. Empty. I thought it empty. Then I saw a slight movement, a blink, a shift in posture. Nothing else. No sound. And the more I looked, the more the shadows themselves seemed to ripple, like smoke caught in a draft. I had to remind myself, these were prisoners, people, or at least something resembling them. And yet, impossible. I kept walking, Flashlights swinging across faces, some staring, some bowed, some just waiting. I noticed names scratched into the concrete walls. Faintly, barely legible. Initials, dates. None that matched anything official. I traced one with my finger, the letters cold under my touch. They almost pulsed, almost breathed. I shook my hand away. Then came the whispers, not from the cells, not from me, not even from the air as I understood it. They were inside my mind, low and indistinct at first, then sharper. Do not forget us. We are waiting. I froze. My stomach lurched. I wanted to run. I wanted to slam the cells closed behind me and flee back to the lobby. But the hallway stretched longer than it should have, endless in its gray and steel, and I knew I could not move freely. The courthouse wanted me here. It had always wanted me here. I approached another cell, smaller, toward the back. The figure inside, it was crouched low, hugging knees to chest. Every movement was deliberate enough to suggest thought. But when I spoke, "Are you?" it cocked its head, and I felt, rather than heard, its answer, a refusal. I could feel it radiating. Do not try to release us. Do not try to understand. I realized then what the building was showing me. It wasn't the prisoners who were unusual. It wasn't even the floor. It was the way the courthouse held them, cataloged them, kept them from time itself. Names were irrelevant. Paperwork was irrelevant. The cells existed to hold presence, to trap something I could not name, something the city had forgotten. I kept walking. One by one, I checked the cells, noting the impossible emptiness and impossible occupancy. None of the people had identification, yet each was distinct. Each left an impression, an aura of memory I couldn't place. I could feel crimes, debts, fears that were not mine, saturating the dust and the cold air. The whispers multiplied, overlapping, a chorus of absent voices. Do not forget us. We are waiting. We will remain. I stumbled back against the wall, leaning heavily, letting the flashlight swing in a wide arc. The hallway seemed longer than it should have been, folding on itself in impossible ways. Doors appeared where none had existed. Shadows stretched over doors that weren't there before. I realized I didn't know the distance to the stairwell. I didn't know how far the cells extended. And I didn't know if leaving was even an option. And then I noticed something I wish I hadn't. In one of the far cells, where the figure was slumped against the wall, a thin line of ink appeared on the floor, like a path of a pen. It spelled something, and I had to lean close to read. Soon, I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my fingers trembling on the keys of the guard radio. I wanted to call for backup. I wanted to radio the chief, explain the situation, but I could feel the air resisting me. The hallway seemed to stretch further as I reached for the microphone, almost laughing at my motion, though I heard no sound. Time didn't feel like time here. Minutes could have been hours. Hours could have been seconds. The figures didn't move unless I looked directly at them. And even then, I couldn't tell if they were alive or merely shadows given form. I took a step back. Another step. My boots scuffed the dust. The whispers surged into one voice. You will stay. We will wait. I realized with a sick, cold certainty that the floor had a law of its own. The courthouse had rules I could not break. The prisoners, these entities without names, had no release dates. They had been waiting decades, maybe centuries, for someone like me to notice. And now that I had, there was no walking away. I tried to move, to retrace my steps to the stairwell, to the lobby, to the exit, but the hallway stretched further. The cells multiplied before my eyes. Shapes and shadows pressed closer. The whispers became a soft chorus in my skull, guiding me, taunting me, anchoring me in this floor. I understood then. This was not a place that ever lets prisoners go, and somehow I had become part of its roll call. I stopped. I turned toward the nearest cell, shining the flashlight into the darkness. One figure rose slightly, its head cocked, eyes fixed on me. It was waiting, patient, endless. I felt inside my chest, pressing my heartbeat into a rhythm I couldn't escape. I backed away slowly. The hallway shifted subtly, guiding me, and as I reached the stairwell, the whispers faded, but the presence didn't. It followed, waiting, always waiting. I climbed the stairs, hands shaking, every nerve screaming. I reached the landing and saw the lobby in dim light. Everything seemed ordinary, too ordinary. The exit doors loomed in front of me. I wanted to run, but I hesitated, feeling the eyes of the floor, the cells, the prisoners, watching, recording, waiting. I realized then that the courthouse was never about law. Not really. It was about collection, observation, retention, and I had become part of the ledger, a visitor to a ledger that would not let me leave. I left the lobby that night, flashlight swinging, sweat running down my spine, keys cold in my hand. The air felt lighter upstairs. The whispers were gone, but I knew they were waiting. Somewhere below, in cells that held no records, no names, no release dates, waiting for the next person to step too close, too curious, too human. And I knew, without doubt, that the floor would remember me, and one day I would return. I thought I was ready for floor below, after walking among the nameless prisoners, after hearing the whispers echoing in the cells. I told myself I could handle anything, but nothing had prepared me for the interrogation room. It was small, sterile, white walls, a single metal table, and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. Standard enough, or so it should have been. But the air was heavy, almost viscous, like moving through water. Every breath felt drawn out, slow, weighted. And in that silence, I could hear them. At first, I thought it was the building settling, a groan of steel, a shift in concrete. But the voices were different, soft, near my ears, though no one was there. Names, dates, deeds, all whispered with certainty. I shook my head. Hello, I asked aloud, though my voice sounded small, almost swallowed by the room. Nothing answered except a faint hum in my skull. Then the first confession came. I shouldn't have done it, a man's voice said, trembling. I never meant to, but it happened. I froze. The words were intimate, the kind of confession one gives in a courtroom or to a priest. But the strangest part, I hadn't asked, hadn't questioned anyone, and yet the words struck me personally. They weren't familiar because they belonged to someone I knew. They were familiar because they belonged to me, or at least they were words I could have said in another life, under another circumstance. Who's there? I whispered, gripping the edge of the table. My palms were damp. Silence. Then another voice, sharper, colder. You saw it. You let it happen. You could have stopped it. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. My knees pressed against the steel chair, unyielding. I wanted to stand, wanted to run, but the floor beneath me pressed back. Every step felt heavier. The voices multiplied, overlapping, layering themselves in a chorus I could barely comprehend. Each one recounted crimes I had never committed, theft, assault, lies told to cover other lies, murders I didn't remember, names of people I had never met. Yet the confessions felt vivid, detailed. I stumbled back, almost knocking over the chair. My flashlight shone on the walls. Empty, just a sterile white. The table, the chairs. Nothing else. And yet, the air vibrated with memory. The room remembered. It remembered before I could. I backed against the wall, trying to ground myself. I wanted to shout, to call names of the prisoners below, to hear any human voice that wasn't inside my head. But the voices ignored me. They spoke in my mind, in my own tone. Sometimes my own voice, sometimes not. I did it, whispered one. I covered it up. They'll never know. I watched it happen, said another. I did nothing. I felt nausea creeping up my spine. The confessions weren't accusations. They were admissions, intimately detailed, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. And somehow, they weren't only from prisoners. Some were mine, things I thought buried, things I hadn't yet done, things I would do. I turned toward the table, seeking some anchor, some object to focus on. But the metal surface reflected nothing but shadows. My own reflection was warped, twisted. I thought I saw a second face behind mine for a brief moment. Eyes darker, lips thinner, a faint smirk that wasn't mine. I blinked. Gone. The voices surge again, faster now, layering over one another. You know this. You did this. You will do this. You cannot deny it. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles bled. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse, subtly moving closer. Each pulse synchronized with the words in my head, with the crimes they confessed. The floor wasn't just observing, it was narrating, anticipating, recording, judging. I stumbled backward into the wall, my back pressing into cold plaster. I wanted to tell myself it was stress, exhaustion, my imagination running wild. But the details of each confession were precise. Names, times, places, tiny, specific details that no one could have known. Some belonged to people who never existed. Others belonged to me, in lives I hadn't yet lived. I realized then that the floor didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to remember, to absorb it all. The prisoners below, the whispers in the hallway, the cells, the steel and concrete. All of it was a ledger, and tonight I was being added. A particularly sharp voice cut through the swirl. "I'm sorry," it said. "I thought it was over, but it's not. You'll understand soon." I fell to my knees, head in my hands. The voices multiplied, layering memories of crimes I couldn't place in time. One by one, they were whispered, muttered, half prayers, half accusations. I didn't understand, couldn't understand, and yet each word felt inevitable, like a timeline I had already begun walking. Even if I didn't yet know it, I looked up at the chair opposite mine. Empty, or so it seemed. Then a shadow moved, just a flicker, barely perceptible, like someone exhaling in the corner. And I knew it wasn't a shadow at all. Something unseen had taken the seat, waiting, watching, listening. Why me? I asked aloud. The voice in my head answered before I could even hear it. "Because you will listen," it said. "Because you are the next in line. Because you are already part of this." I pressed my hands over my ears. It didn't help. The confessions weren't coming through the air. They were coming through me. The floor had found its way inside my skull. I could feel every whispered detail, every shadowed thought. And somehow, I knew the truth. The floor didn't just store the confessions. It created them. It whispered what it wanted me to hear, shaping me, guiding me. I crawled toward the door, trying to escape, trying to breathe air that didn't carry their words. But the hallway stretched impossibly. The stairwell seemed farther away. The exit receded into shadows. Every step I took brought the voices closer, louder, sharper. I felt them in my bones, in my heartbeat, in the sweat running down my spine. And then, almost gentle, one voice singled me out. Clear, intimate, like someone standing right behind me. "You'll see it, all of it, every crime, every lie, every sin, and you'll remember them, all of them, because you belong here now." I froze. My stomach turned cold. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I knew I couldn't. Not fully. Not yet. The confessions had claimed a part of me. The floor had imprinted itself on my memory, on my consciousness. And there was no undoing it. I sank to the floor, the metal of the chair biting into my knees. The voices slowed, settling into a low hum. Not gone, not silent, but waiting, patient, like a tide retreating only to return stronger. I knew I had hours ahead of me, hours in which every confession, every whispered crime would replay layer upon layer. And I understood with a dread that froze my blood. The confessions weren't just for me to hear. They were for me to carry, to become part of, to live. And if I ever thought I could leave, ever thought I could step away from the courthouse, I was wrong. I closed my eyes. I counted breaths. I tried to separate the whispers from my own thoughts, but I knew they were one now, intertwined. The floor had marked me. The prisoners had watched. And tomorrow, the confessions would continue, new voices, new crimes, all pointing toward me. I shivered in the cold interrogation room. I wanted the floor to forget me. I wanted the cells to be empty. I wanted the courthouse to be just a building, a place of law, but deep down I knew the truth. I would never leave the confessions behind. I would carry them, and someday, someone else would hear them in my voice. I thought I had felt the weight of this floor before, the way it pressed down like a tide of cold iron, but nothing had prepared me for what happened next. The door to the next corridor slammed behind me. I didn't hear it close. I only felt the shudder travel up my spine. The air in the hallway was thick with dust and something else. Something heavier, darker. I had moved down here thinking I was uncovering secrets, collecting evidence, cataloging memories that weren't mine. But now I realized the building wasn't just keeping records. It was keeping me. I tried the doors along the corridor. Steel frames, rusting locks, but none would budge. Some were sealed shut, as though welded from the inside, while others groaned under my push, swinging open just enough to show darkness that was too complete, too absolute. And in that darkness, I saw them again, the prisoners, not the shadowed memories, not the whispers I could almost catch in my mind. These figures were real. Or maybe the floor made them real. I froze in front of one cell, and the figure inside turned. There was no hesitation, no blink, just eyes fixed on me, unflinching, as if it had been waiting. Its lips moved, forming words I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. They weren't asking for help. They were issuing a command. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. The confessions in the last room, the voices, the crimes, the guilt, felt like nothing compared to the weight of those eyes. They weren't seeking absolution. They weren't even prisoners anymore. They were sentinels, guardians of the floor, and now I realized they were waiting for me to join them. I tried to step away, to run toward the stairs I thought I had passed, but the hallway stretched farther than it should have. It warped. The metal doors along the wall shifted positions as I looked. Corridors looped, doubling back on themselves. No matter where I ran, I was always back in front of that first cell, the same unblinking eyes watching, waiting. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate click, like the sound of a key turning in an unseen lock. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, pale in the dim fluorescent glow, and on my palm, etched faintly into the skin, were words I didn't recognize. "You belong here." I screamed, but the sound echoed oddly, distorted, almost coming from inside my head rather than out of my mouth. The air vibrated with whispers, murmurs, laughter that wasn't quite human. And then the cell door opened silently of its own accord. A cold draft rolled out, brushing against my neck, carrying the smell of rusted metal, old sweat, and fear. I wanted to step back. I wanted to refuse. But my legs moved on their own. Step by step, I walked toward the open doorway. My own voice sounded far away, shouting, questioning, pleading. But the floor didn't answer. Only the shadows beckoned, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse with anticipation. Inside the cell, it was darker than the hallway, darker than my memory. And yet I could see the empty beds, the steel shackles bolted into the walls, the faded graffiti carved by hands long gone. And in the center of it all, a chair, simple and metal, as if placed there just for me. I knew, before I sat, what would happen. I knew because every whisper, every confession, every shadow had told me the chair was a sentence. The floor had judged me, and now it would execute its verdict without trial, without law, without recourse. I sat, and the room sighed. It wasn't a breath or a wind, but the very building exhaling, settling around me like a cloak of iron. I felt my spine stiffen, my muscles lock. The whispers weren't just in my head anymore. They were inside me, moving through my veins, crawling over my skin. Every memory of the prisoners, every crime I'd never committed, every guilt I had never felt. They became mine, solid and immediate. The shadows shifted. The figures from the cells, my predecessors, stepped forward, though their feet never touched the ground. Their eyes held mine, patient, knowing. One reached out, a hand transparent but solid in my vision, and pressed it against my chest. A cold fire shot through me, a burning that was ice, a pain that wasn't pain, a fear that was calm. "You are the record now," it said, though no lips moved. The sound traveled to the floor, through the walls, through the marrow of my bones. "You will not leave. You will catalog. You will remember. And one day, someone else will join you here." I wanted to argue, to resist. I tried to twist in the chair, tried to push the hands away, tried to scream, but my body didn't respond. I was no longer my own. I was simply a vessel, a conduit, a ledger waiting to be filled. The cell door slammed shut behind me. I didn't notice it close. I only felt the pressure. The room, the floor, the walls. They were alive, moving, watching, and in the silence that followed, I realized that even as I existed, I was already recorded. Every thought, every fear, every heartbeat, documented in some ledger that no one else could ever read. I tried to recall the outside world, the sunlight, the streets, the people I had walked among before this assignment. But the memories fragmented, faces blurred, times jumbled. It was as if my life had been edited, cut down to these moments in the cell, these moments in the building that refused to release me. Hours, or maybe days, passed. I couldn't tell. Time had become a trick, a loop. The whispers were constant now, a low hum vibrating through my bones. Some were confessions, some were commands, some were warnings. All were mine. I noticed for the first time the other cells. Shadows behind steel bars, each containing a figure that had once walked my path. Some nodded when my eyes met theirs. Some stared in silence. And I understood they were not prisoners. They were the floor's history, its memory, its enforcement. And now, I would be the next line, the next chapter, the next whisper it sent out into the world. The chair beneath me shifted slightly, just enough for me to notice, not a mechanical adjustment, more like a pulse, a heartbeat of the floor itself. And I realized the truth. The building had no doors, no exits, no mercy. It existed to collect, to consume, to convert. And now it had me. A shadow fell across the room, longer than the walls allowed. The whispers intensified, overlapping voices, names, crimes, dates, places, all mixing into a dense fog of sound. I could feel the building's awareness now, turning toward me, probing, testing. You will see them all, it said. Every crime, every secret, every memory. You will remember them, and you will wait for the next. I understood that I was already gone. My body, my mind, my soul, already part of the floor's machinery. And in that moment, I didn't fear death, because I wasn't alive in any normal sense anymore. I feared eternity. I feared the endless echo of voices, the endless accounting of sins, the endless waiting for someone else to stumble down these halls. I leaned back in the chair, resigned. My chest heaved, but not with panic, with understanding, with dread, with a knowledge that I was no longer a guard, no longer a man with free will. I was now part of the courthouse, part of the record, part of the sentence that had no end. The shadows shifted again, closer now. I could see the faint outlines of hands, faces, eyes, all of those who had come before me. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. I felt their presence in my bones, their memory in my cells, their inevitability in my mind. And as the first whispers of new arrivals began at the outer doors, voices calling my name, asking questions, searching for someone to guard the floor, I realized that I would answer them, not with words, not with life, but with memory, with confession, with the record of sins I now carried forever. The floor exhaled, and the cell became still, but I knew it was only waiting, waiting for the next, waiting for the moment when another would arrive. Unaware, and I, their guide through guilt and memory, would whisper every crime into their mind. I am no longer the guard. I am the record. I am the sentence. And the courthouse waits. I first noticed it when I pulled the dusty ledger from the top shelf, the one everyone said hadn't been touched in decades. The edges were brittle, and the leather cover had cracked lines like a road map of time itself. I set it on the table, and the fluorescent light overhead flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows across the room. I told myself it was just the old wiring. I told myself a lot of things that night. The first entries were normal. Routine notes about town inspections, weather reports, minor incidents. Names I recognized, people I had seen around town, even if only in passing. But as I flipped the pages, something began to shift. The dates jumped, not by days, weeks, or months. Years. Entire years vanished between entries, leaving me in a room of silence and paper that no one had written. I frowned at one particular jump, an entire decade missing. 1987 was followed by 1997, and the ledger carried on as if nothing had happened in between. The handwriting didn't change. Same tight loops, Same careful spacing, same ink that had aged evenly. But the words weren't just records. They were predictions. At first, it was subtle. Notes like, the roof at the old mill will collapse next winter. No injuries reported. I shrugged it off. A safe prediction. But then came entries like, Margaret Holloway will trip over the curb outside the post office at 2:17 p.m., spraining her wrist. I remember that afternoon clearly. I had watched her limp into the pharmacy. My stomach turned cold. I had seen this happen in the ledger before it happened in reality. I went back, tracing the previous pages. Each leap in time contained entries describing events I had no memory of, yet soon after, they occurred exactly as written. A dog wandering into traffic, a power outage in the south end of town, the fire at the corner diner, 3 days before it even made the local news. It wasn't just minor incidents anymore. The ledger began to detail arguments, deaths, disappearances, people I knew, people I had laughed with, shared coffee with. And the strangest part was the precision. Names, times, even the sequence of actions. Reading it felt like watching a memory I hadn't lived yet, and I couldn't stop myself from turning the pages. I tried to set it down, tried to tell myself this was coincidence, but the entries were relentless, pulling me deeper into their rhythm. One page described a car accident at the intersection I drove through every day, even noting the color of the sedan involved. I froze as the sound of brakes screeching echoed in my memory. My pulse jumped. I looked out the window. The intersection was empty now, but my hands were shaking, and then it began addressing me. Not directly, but subtly, as if the ledger knew I was reading. He will notice the pattern tonight, it said in one entry, referring to me without a name. My skin crawled. The room felt smaller, the shadows thicker. The ink seemed to shimmer under the flickering light. Tiny movements across the page I could almost see with the corner of my eye. I kept reading, unable to stop. The entries grew darker, not just foretelling accidents, but suggesting outcomes, punishments, small cruelties I had never thought would touch my life. One line made my stomach lurch. By the end of the week, he will question his own memory. That was exactly where I was, sitting in the dim archive, my memory twisting around what I had already seen and what had yet to happen. The log didn't just skip years, it skipped lives. Whole chapters vanished, with no explanation, no reference, as if time itself had been cut and stitched back together without my knowledge. And then came the pages that described me in detail. My routines, my late-night habits, the exact way I would breathe when terrified. I slammed the book shut for a moment, forcing myself to breathe. I told myself it was coincidence, that someone had filled in the ledger after the fact, that I was seeing patterns that weren't real. But when I opened again, the words seemed to react. The ink had darkened where I touched it, letters curling slightly, edges forming shapes that almost looked like faces in torment. One entry was from the future. I knew because it listed a date I hadn't yet reached. It described an event so precise I couldn't ignore it. He will hear the first knock at midnight, and the room will feel colder than it has in decades. I laughed nervously, shaking my head, but the hairs on my neck stood on end. I checked the clock. 11:55. The room was still, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft whisper of the building settling. I waited. The last 5 minutes crawled. Every tick of the clock seemed heavier, louder, pressing into my skull. And then, tap, one soft, deliberate knock. My heart skipped. I looked around the empty archive. No one. Nothing moved. But the knock came again, echoing from the walls themselves, or maybe from my own mind. I could feel it then. The ledger wasn't just predicting events. It was interacting with reality. Every word I read, every line I traced, was a thread connecting me to what had not yet occurred. And I realized with a kind of creeping terror that I was not merely an observer. I was part of the pattern. I tried to put the ledger away, to leave it on the shelf and walk out. But my hands betrayed me. They returned to it, flipping pages I didn't want to see, scanning lines that chilled me to the bone. Each entry became more insistent, more personal. He hesitates. He touches the ink again. He will not look away. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. I couldn't tell anymore. Time itself felt suspended, warped by the log's presence. And then I saw something that made me want to run, but knew I couldn't. An entry describing a door in the archive I had never seen, labeled with my own initials. Behind it, he will find what is waiting. My pulse thundered. I glanced around the room. All the doors were accounted for. Cabinets, shelves, the single exit. It was ordinary. But now in my mind, I could see a shadowed doorway, unmarked, slightly ajar, almost breathing. And the ledger seemed to vibrate in my hands, urging me forward, compelling me to approach, to cross the threshold into something I didn't understand but could not resist. The ink on the page began to smear slightly, not with water, not with moisture I could see, but with time itself. Words twisted, forming images I could feel rather than see. Faces I didn't recognize, places I had never been, all layered over the archive I knew. And at the center of it, a tiny phrase burned itself into the paper. One seen cannot be unseen. I dropped the ledger. It hit the table with a dull thud, but the effect didn't end. The room seemed to shift, edges of walls bending, shadows stretching into corners they shouldn't reach. I could hear a faint whisper, soft as the wind, almost repeating the log's words in a voice that was not human, not entirely mine. He will follow. He will know. He will remain. I stumbled back, away from the table, my hands clutching my head. The ledger lay there, innocuous, silent. Yet I knew it was alive with time, alive with inevitability. And I realized that whatever was in those pages wasn't just predicting events. It was writing me into them. I left the archive that night with the ledger tucked under my arm, knowing sleep would not come. I could feel it breathing against my chest, alive with the years it had skipped and the futures it had foretold. The entries were waiting, patient and deliberate, ready to fill in every missing moment, every unclaimed day, every life yet to be touched. Outside, the rain tapped softly on the windows. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. I could hear the whispers still, echoing in my mind, and I knew one thing for certain. I would never be able to read that log without being drawn into its rhythm, without being a part of its predictions, without being unable to tell where I ended and it began. I carried it home, not out of curiosity, not out of duty, but because I feared that if I didn't, someone or something would come for it, and the events it recorded would come for me instead. And as I lay awake that night, the first drops of rain, sounding like distant fingers tapping against glass, I could feel it. The ledger's pull, patient and eternal, waiting for the next entry, waiting for me. And I knew the record of my own life had already begun, written in ink I had not yet earned, by a hand I could not see, in a time I could not control. It started with the file cabinet. I had been working nights at the station for years, sorting paperwork nobody wanted to touch, when I noticed a folder lying on my desk that shouldn't exist. The label was crisp, printed recently, and it bore a name I recognized, Thomas Keller. I frowned. Thomas had never been arrested, never had any record on file, and yet there was bold letters staring back at me. Keller Thomas, charges pending. My stomach tightened. I picked up the folder, thumbing through pages that were impossibly detailed, witness statements I'd never seen, incident reports I couldn't confirm, and a date next week. I laughed nervously, telling myself someone was playing a joke, maybe a new deputy trying to freak me out. But as I flipped through the rest of the cabinet, the pattern grew impossible to ignore. Every folder listed a person who hadn't yet committed a crime, and in each, the details were specific. Times, locations, what they were wearing, even minor gestures, like how they might fidget when questioned. I leaned back in my chair, trying to shake the unease, and that's when I noticed the handwriting in the margins. Sharp, precise, almost like it was scratching itself into the paper. Notes like he hesitates at the crosswalk, or will glance left before the fall. I felt my pulse spike. I had seen some of these things happen before, years ago. Things I had witnessed as a young officer, long before these folders had existed. I tried to dismiss it. After all, it could be coincidence. Predictable patterns in people's behavior. But the folders kept stacking themselves on my desk. Overnight, without anyone touching them. I counted once, 10 names, then 20, then 40. I hadn't filed them. Nobody had touched them. Yet every folder contained events that were inevitable. I tested it. I took one folder home. Mary Holloway. The report said she would argue with her neighbor at 7:15 p.m., spill coffee on her coat, and storm back into her apartment. I watched the clock. 7:12, 7:13. I gripped the folder tight as I tracked her movements through the dusty window across the street. She did it exactly as the folder said. Every gesture, every word, every spill. My hands shook as I slammed the folder closed. That's when panic set in. This wasn't just a record. It was a map, a prediction. And it didn't stop at observation. It seemed to dictate events. I felt like I was reading a script for reality, where I was a minor character, powerless to change anything. The next night, I opened a folder for my own town. The name at the top made my blood run cold. My partner, Jeff. I read the charges. Minor theft, an altercation with a stranger, something that hadn't happened yet. But the level of detail. I knew Jeff's routines, his moods, the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was nervous. The folder accounted for every nuance. I wanted to throw the folder away, burn it, shred it, but every time I tried, it returned to my desk in the morning like it had a will of its own. The names multiplied. I stopped leaving the station at night. I stayed in the dim light, watching the folders, flipping pages I didn't want to see, reading arrests that hadn't happened yet. And then I realized something worse. Some of the people named were already gone, missing. One page listed a young man, Simon Ward, accused of breaking into a home. I had responded to that house months ago, only to find the place empty, the occupant vanished. The folder detailed the argument, the struggle, the arrest that would never occur, yet somehow, according to the file, it was set to happen. I felt my own reflection in the polished surface of the cabinet. My eyes were wide, my face pale. I knew the folders weren't just telling me what would happen. They were watching, waiting. Each time I read a name, I felt the weight of inevitability pressing down, pressing on my shoulders. One folder bore my name. I froze. I hadn't committed any crime. At least, none that anyone would report. And yet, the report was meticulous. It described a confrontation with an unknown assailant, a fight, a gun discharge, and my arrest. I could see it in my mind. The ledger of inevitability had me written in. No escape, no error. I tried to close it, tried to set aside, but the words seemed to crawl across the page, reshaping, twisting into something almost alive. He will open again. The letters flexed under my gaze. I dropped the folder, heart hammering, and it hit the floor with a thud that echoed unnaturally in the empty station. The shadows seemed thicker then, curling along the edges of the room. The fluorescent lights flickered, dimming, pulsing. I heard a soft scratching from the walls, the sound of fingernails against concrete. I told myself it was the building settling. I told myself I was imagining it, but the folders continued to stack themselves, neat piles growing from the floor like sprouting roots. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the people named in the files, wondering if they knew, if anyone had ever noticed the pattern. Maybe someone had gone mad. Maybe someone had disappeared into the same inevitability I felt pressing against me. And the rain began to fall outside, slow, steady, tapping against the windows like a metronome counting down toward events I couldn't change. The next day, I tried to warn people, told Jeff about his folder. He laughed, dismissive, but I could see the unease in his eyes. I had seen it before in the folders. I tried to reach the others, but the names kept moving faster than I could track. People I hadn't met yet appeared on pages I hadn't touched yet. Each entry seemed to preempt life, and every time I resisted reading, the folders adjusted, presenting me with new inevitabilities. I tried leaving the station. I walked out into the morning light, thinking distance would help, but the folders followed me. Not physically, not in a way I could touch, but in my mind. I could see their edges in the corner of my vision. I could feel the names pressing against me, each one a story waiting for reality to catch up. One night, I heard footsteps, not in the hallway, not in the building. Outside, I looked toward the station doors and saw shadows moving in rhythm with my heartbeat. I didn't recognize the figures, but they were named in the files. People who hadn't committed any crime yet, walking in time of my panic, their presence both real and unreal. I ran back inside, slamming the door, but it didn't help. The folders lay open across the floor, and the words had shifted again. "He can't leave." I felt the room tilt. I felt a presence behind me, a pressure that made my chest ache, whispering the names aloud in a chorus I couldn't silence. I realized then that the station itself was part of it, part of the ledger, part of the inevitabilities. Each room, each hallway, each light flicker seemed to respond to the names. I was no longer just reading arrests that hadn't happened yet. I was witnessing reality bending around them, bending around me. I don't know how long I stayed there. Hours? Days? Time blurred, skipping in fragments, like the log had taught it to. And then I understood. The folders weren't warnings. They weren't predictions. They were instructions. They waited for me to act, for me to witness, for me to become part of the system that ensured these events would occur exactly as written. I sat down at the desk, shaking. The pile of folders before me seemed impossibly high. Names spilling over pages, handwriting sharp and exact. And I understood something I couldn't unhear. If I stopped reading, if I walked away, the events might not happen, or worse, they might happen differently, unpredictably. And the ledger did not tolerate unpredictability. So I kept reading, because the names, my name included, demanded it. Because the crimes would happen whether I watched or not. Because the station and the folders it produced and the endless log of inevitability were not just records of what was, they were shaping everything yet to come. And I was trapped inside it. Every fold, every page, every name, every arrest I hadn't witnessed yet. I thought I understood the ledger when I first arrived. Names, dates, arrests that hadn't happened yet. I thought it was some elaborate system, a catalog of inevitabilities. But that belief shattered the night. I opened a folder labeled with my own badge number. The first page was blank, or so it seemed. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the yellow paper. Then I saw it. A scrawl in the margins, small and deliberate, a handwriting I knew too well. My handwriting. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. I set the folder down and shook my head. Surely this was a trick, a prank left by someone who'd been watching me, someone with access to station. But there was no one. I was alone. The lights buzzed overhead. My own pulse sounded deafening in the silence. I picked the folder back up, page after page. My handwriting filled the margins, detailing things I had never written, details about people I had never met, instructions I had never given, notes on events I had never witnessed, observations of places I had never been. And at the bottom of each page, scrawled with the same precise loops and flourishes I recognized, was a signature. Mine. I stumbled back from the desk, my stomach churning. My hands shook as I touched my own face, trying to ground myself. The thought hit me like a punch. I had written this. Somehow, I had already written it. I could feel the ledger watching me then. The shadows in the room stretched and pulled toward the edges of the light, creeping along the walls. I could hear the faint scratching of pen on paper, though no one held one. My reflection in the window showed me staring, pale and hollow-eyed, at the impossible truth. I flipped through the other folders. More of my handwriting. Notes I didn't remember writing. Corrections to reports I hadn't touched. Dates and times aligned with my own patrols, my own shifts, my own life. And with each page, the ledger seemed to pulse, like a living thing aware of my discovery. I tried to leave the station. My legs carried me down the hall, but the air was thick, heavy. The folders multiplied as I passed. Each one had my handwriting, my signature, my observations. It was as if I had always been here, always contributing to a record I didn't remember joining. I forced myself back to the desk. I had to understand. I had to see how deep it went. I opened a folder for a man I had arrested years ago. An old case, cold now. The page described the arrest in excruciating detail, but between the lines, there were notes I hadn't written, notes I had written in my own hand, predicting every word, every reaction. My mind twisted in on itself. How could I have written something before it happened? How could I have written it at all? I touched the ink with my fingertip. The lines were real. I could feel the texture of the pen pressing into the paper. My handwriting, my signature, my presence, inscribed across events that weren't mine to know yet. The more I read, the more I understood. This ledger wasn't just recording reality. It was shaping it. My handwriting was a contract. Every note, every correction, every margin scribble was an act of creation. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of the station, I could feel a presence waiting, ensuring I kept writing, ensuring the ledger remained complete. I tried to resist. I slammed folders shut, pushed them off the desk, stomped on the floorboards. But each morning they returned, open, waiting, and each page had my handwriting, my name, my signature, my certainty. I began seeing the writing everywhere, in the condensation on the windows, in the streaks of dust along the shelves, in the flicker of the fluorescent lights, letters, loops, slanted lines, all my hand, all my signature. I could not escape it. I could not outrun it. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my hand moving across pages I had not touched. I saw my signature beneath events I had not lived. Faces, names, details of crimes and accidents yet to occur, all tied to me in some impossible way. One night, I reached for a folder in the dim light. My fingers trembled as I opened it, and there it was, my own handwriting. But not just notes or observations this time. It was a confession, a statement I had never made, describing a crime I had not committed. Every word, every letter, every signature at the bottom, mine. The ledger was not just recording, it was claiming me. I ran to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass, and I saw shadows outside. Not people, not animals, just shapes that shifted and writhed. The air smelled of ink and rain, a metallic tang that made my stomach heave. I could hear whispers in the corners, scratching, murmuring, and every whisper said my name. I understood then. I was no longer just reading the ledger. I was part of it. Each note I saw, each signature I recognized, each margin scribble I traced. It was me, or a version of me, or perhaps some future me. Time had folded on itself, and I was trapped inside the pages. My handwriting was everywhere, because I was everywhere. I tried destroying the folders. Fire, tearing water. Nothing worked. The ink ran, smeared, dissolved, but the words remained, perfectly legible the next morning, and every page bore my signature, my contract, my inevitability. I began talking to myself, whispering to the shadows, trying to bargain, trying to reason. I didn't do this, I said. I can't do this. It's not real. But the station answered in silence. Or perhaps it was never silence. It was a ledger speaking back, a low hum vibrating through the walls, pressing against my skull. I started keeping a log of my own, trying to prove I wasn't the author. But every word I wrote was mirrored, copied, inscribed in the folders without my knowledge. I would wait to find my handwriting across events I hadn't lived, across crimes I hadn't witnessed, across confessions I would never remember making. The ledger became my reflection, every page a mirror, every signature my own. And I realized something I cannot forget. The ledger does not distinguish between past, present, or future, between observer and participant, between me and the record. I began to feel my body fade. My hands, my arms, my face. I could feel them slipping, becoming less real, more like the ink I traced across the folders. And yet, the writing remained. My handwriting, my signature, my inevitability. I no longer reach for the folders. They come to me, stacking themselves on my desk, on the floor, against the walls. Each page brimming with details, notes, corrections, signatures, and each one is mine. I cannot escape it. I cannot leave it. If you were to enter the station now, you would see the folders lying neatly, and perhaps you would not notice the tremble in the air, the faint scratching of a pen on paper where no pen exists, the sense that the room itself is alive, observing, waiting. And if you were brave enough to look closely, you would see my signature. Your eyes might trick you at first, but it is unmistakable, slanted, precise, inevitable. The ledger has claimed me. I am every note, every margin, every arrest yet to occur. I am the ink, the paper, the witness, and the record, and the ledger keeps writing. I should have left the moment I realized the ledger wasn't just a record. I should have run, screamed, done anything but stay. But something held me there, something heavier than fear, something that felt like inevitability pressing down on my shoulders. I opened the folder that had arrived that morning. It was smaller than the others, thinner, almost delicate. But the moment I touched it, the air around me seemed to thicken. I could feel it, like the building itself was leaning and listening, waiting. The first page bore a single line. No margins, no scribbles, no notes. Just one sentence. Perfectly inked in handwriting that was mine, though I'd never written it. Duty never ends. My stomach turned. I looked around the room, half expecting something, to appear in the shadows. But there was only silence, the low hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint rustle of paper. I turned the page. Another line. Another. Each sentence more precise, more terrifying than the last. They were instructions, orders, locations, names, times, a schedule of events I hadn't lived yet. And at the bottom of the last page, my signature. Not a copy, not a forgery. Mine. I dropped the folder. My hand shook. My pulse thundered in my ears. I pressed my palms to my face, tried to stop seeing the ink, the words, the inevitability, but it was already too late. The ledger had claimed me, and now it was speaking the only way it knew how. Assignment. I read the next line aloud, almost involuntarily. The next sheriff is you. I froze. The air grew colder, heavier, like wet cement settling over me. My own name, inked in letters I could not deny, marking me as the next in a line I did not want to join. The ledger wasn't a book. It was a sentence. And I was the prisoner. I wanted to argue. I wanted to protest. But no words came. My throat felt thick, my lips stiff. The ledger didn't care about protests. It cared about completion. I tried to step back, to leave the room, to escape this fate. But the walls themselves seemed to bend inward. Shadows stretched along the floor, climbing the walls, pulling in corners where the light didn't reach. And in every shadow, I could feel eyes on me. Judgmental, patient, hungry. The station had always been alive, but now it felt like it was closing in, drawing me into the ledger itself. I picked the folder back up, trembling, and began reading the instructions line by line. They weren't just directions. They were my life rewritten. Patrols I would take, cases I would handle, decisions I would make, but not decisions I chose. Decisions dictated by a book that already knew the outcome. A name appeared, someone I'd never met, a call I hadn't received, an event I hadn't witnessed, and yet the ledger described it in detail, precise, exact, as though it had already happened. And at the bottom, my signature. Mine, mine, mine. I could feel my reflection in the window beside me, but it wasn't right. My eyes looked too wide, my jaw too tight. My hand shook uncontrollably as I flipped another page. And with each page, the reality around me shifted. The air grew damp and metallic. The hum of the lights deepened into a low, resonant vibration that seemed to enter my bones. I started seeing other names, past sheriffs, deputies, constables, each one marked in a ledger, each one with a line declaring their duty never ends. Some names were crossed out, marked as complete. Others were still blank, waiting for assignment. And now, my name was at the top of the page, bold and final. I stumbled back, heart racing, and the folders on the shelf shivered. They weren't stacked neatly anymore. They leaned toward me, waiting, pressing, as though the books themselves wanted to envelop me. I could hear the faint scratching of ink on paper, though no pen was in motion. And then I realized the ledger wasn't just observing, it was alive, and I was its next keeper. I tried to run. I tried to leave the station, to step into the night and breathe free air, but the doors wouldn't open. The hallways stretched further than they should. Shadows pooled and moved, blocking every exit. And the whispers started, soft at first, just on the edge of hearing, then louder, insistent, chanting my name, repeating, confirming. You are the next sheriff. You are the next sheriff. I dropped to my knees. My hands shook as I pressed into my ears. But the voices weren't outside. They were inside me, inside the walls, inside the ink. They were the ledger itself, and it was reminding me of my place. I could feel the pen in my hand again, though I hadn't picked one up. Pages began appearing before me, blank at first, then filling with lines I recognized. Lines I knew I would write. I could feel the motion, my hand guided by something I could not resist, tracing every word, every loop of my signature, sealing my fate. I remember the faces of the past sheriffs I had studied in old reports. They looked calm, resigned, hollowed out by duty, and now I understood. This was what they had become. I had thought the ledger recorded events, but it didn't. It orchestrated them. It claimed those who enforced the law, and their duty never ended. Not ever. I screamed. The sound echoed to the empty station, bouncing off walls, folders, shadows. But it did nothing. The ledger did not hear fear. It heard compliance. And as my hands moved on their own, writing the first entry of my assignment, I realized I was no longer free. My mind, my memories, my will, they were all being folded into the ledger's order. I wrote the first report. Details I had not witnessed. Events I could not have known. And at the bottom, my signature, precise, exact. My identity merged with the pages. My existence bound to the ledger's rule. Hours passed. Days. Weeks. Time became meaningless. The station existed outside of clocks. I wrote. I recorded. I observed. And everywhere I looked, the folders multiplied, waiting for my hand to move, my name to appear, my duty to continue. I looked at my reflection again. I am still me, and yet not me. The eyes are mine, the hands are mine, the voice is mine, but the essence is gone. I am the ledger now, and the ledger is me. And the line at the top of the page reads, "Duty never ends." And it is true, it never ends. It will not end. Even as I write this, I feel it reach for the next chapter, the next line, the next name. Somewhere beyond these walls, beyond the station, beyond memory and time, another deputy will arrive. Another hand will pick up a pen. Another name will be written, and I will guide it, because I cannot not. I am the next sheriff. The ledger has assigned me. My hands write what must be done. My mind bends to what must be known, and I am terrified, exhausted, and utterly, irrevocably bound. The ledger waits for me, always, and in its pages, I will exist forever. Duty never ends. I drove past a sign, the one that used to read "Welcome to Pine Hollow," and for a moment, I thought maybe the fog had swallowed the paint. The highway curved sharply, and the trees pressed close, their skeletal branches scratching at my windshield like long, waiting fingers. I gripped the wheel tighter and forced myself to keep going. The town looked like it had been emptied in a hurry. Storefronts were shuttered, windows dusty, their interiors dark and lifeless. Mailboxes leaned at odd angles. Leaves littered the streets. There was no sound except the tires on wet asphalt and the low hum of my engine. I parked in front of the sheriff's station, the old building with peeling white paint and a faded star badge nailed above the door. I had been told to check in and keep the town under observation until the next assignment. That was the official story. No one really explained why Pine Hollow was empty, why the last records were decades old, or why I was still considered the acting sheriff. I stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin. The badge felt heavy on my chest, heavier than it ever had before. It had a certain weight when I wore it as a deputy. But this was different. There were no citizens here, no town council, no town hall. Just me, the badge, and the emptiness. I pushed the door open. The station smelled of damp wood and mildew, the floorboards groaned under my weight, and I could hear the echo of each step bouncing off the walls. The desk was still in place, papers stacked haphazardly, a few rusted keys dangling from hooks. I sat down, trying to steady my breathing. I checked my radio. Silence. Dead static. No calls, no crackle, no interference. The frequencies were clear, but there was no one transmitting. I wasn't surprised, but that didn't make it feel any less eerie. I went through the files left on the desk. Most of them were old reports. Routine patrols, minor infractions, lost pets, neighbor disputes. The last report, though, was different. It wasn't signed. There was no date, just a note in neat handwriting. The badge remains. Duty persists. I swallowed hard. The note made no sense, but somehow I understood. The town was gone. Everyone was gone. But my role, my responsibility, it hadn't ended. It was as if the badge itself was alive, commanding attention, demanding I continue its work even when the work had no reason to exist. I wandered the station, checking the holding cells, rusted bars, empty bunks, and a faint smell of mildew. I ran my fingers along the walls, looking for signs of life. There was none, yet when I walked past the cells, I could have sworn I felt eyes on me, just behind the bars, watching. The sensation made the hairs on my neck prickle. I went outside again, circling the streets. Houses sagged, some with doors wide open, interiors dark, furniture covered in thick sheets of dust. Mail still sat in boxes, unopened for years. I could hear the wind pushing through broken window panes. The sound soft but insistent. Every so often, a door would creak like someone would brush against it. But when I looked, there was nothing. I climbed into my patrol car and sat for a long time. I tried to imagine what it would be like if someone were here, if the town were alive with citizens, with life. But the streets remained empty, the silence absolute, as if the world had stopped moving just to watch me. That's when I first noticed it. Movement, small, subtle, at the edge of my vision. A shadow passing behind a house. A curtain shifting in a window that hadn't been opened in decades. I told myself it was nothing. Wind, imagination, fatigue, but the feeling didn't leave. It pressed against me, insisting that I see, that I notice. I checked the station again, more thoroughly this time. Filing cabinets lined the walls, some open, some locked. Drawers were full of paperwork I had no reason to understand. Forms, letters, receipts, memos. Most of it made no sense, and some of it seemed impossibly recent, as if the town had been active just yesterday. But it hadn't. The air of the building told me so. Dust and decay spoke louder than any report. And then I heard the voice. It wasn't loud, just a whisper at first, like the wind. Sheriff. I froze, heart hammering. I called out, but the words felt empty, swallowed by the station silence. Nothing answered. I told myself I had imagined it. Wind again, a trick of acoustics. But the voice had weight, intention. It knew my name. Over the next hours, I began to explore the outer edges of town, keeping my radio close, expecting a call that would never come. Every time I passed a window, I thought I saw someone watching, but no one was there. Every time I knocked on a door, I heard a reply, faint and hurried, though no one answered. The badge felt heavier with each step I took. It wasn't just metal. It wasn't just a symbol of authority. It had become a tether, a chain. I understood then that I wasn't assigned to the town. The town was assigned to me. And in that realization, the first seed of dread planted itself deep in my chest. I returned to the station before dusk, the light outside dimming fast. The windows no longer reflected the fading sun. They reflected me, and yet not quite. The man in the glass looked smaller, worn, older. My hand shook as I adjusted the badge, trying to convince myself I was still the same person who had walked in that morning. I sat at the desk again and flipped through the files. Some of them were new, letters I hadn't seen, reports I hadn't filed. And then I realized they weren't reports at all. They were instructions. Instructions for me, for the town, for the badge. Every line told me where to go, what to observe, whom to watch. I wanted to leave. I wanted to drive away, to abandon the town, to discard the badge. But every time I approached the car, a force, not physical, not tangible, pushed me back. A sense of obligation, ancient and immovable. A whisper in my ear, duty never ends. By nightfall, the streets were empty shadows and fog. I patrolled them as I had been told. Though no crime occurred, no one walked the roads, no light shone from any window. And yet I felt eyes on me, shapes in the mist that moved just out of reach. I spoke into the radio, half hoping anyone would respond. Silence. I passed the old diner, its sign swinging in the wind, squeaking on its hinges. I paused, seeing a chair shift inside. The lights were dead. The room was empty, yet the sensation of being watched, followed, assessed, remained. I swallowed. fingers tight on the steering wheel. The badge burned against my chest. I returned to the station, and for the first time, I truly understood. This wasn't a job. This wasn't law enforcement. I was the caretaker of nothing, the observer of ghosts, the sheriff of a town that had been erased from the map, yet demanded obedience. The badge wasn't a reward or a symbol. It was a mandate, and I had accepted it, whether I knew it or not. As I sat at the desk, staring at files that made no sense, the fog pressing against the windows, the weight of the badge unbearable, I realized I had already been here too long. The town was watching me, waiting. The silence was listening, and the whisper in the air grew stronger. "Sheriff, your duty begins." I swallowed hard, gripping the edges of the desk. I knew then that I couldn't leave, that the streets, the buildings, the empty eyes in the fog, they had claimed me, and the badge would not let me go. I am Sheriff of Pine Hollow, a town with no people, a place that does not exist on any map. And yet, somehow I am still its law, its watcher, its prisoner. Duty never ends. The first time it happened, I thought it was a mistake. I was sitting at the desk, the fog pressing against the windows like thick wool, when the first citation printed itself in the old, humming typewriter in the corner. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even known it worked. The paper slid out, and there was a neat mechanical script, a fine for speeding, addressed to someone I had never met. I flipped it over. No signature, no officer, no explanation, just the date and the offense. My fingers shook as I held it. I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. I told myself it was old paper shifting in the draft, maybe some prank left behind from whoever had used the station last. But I knew in my gut that it wasn't that simple. Then another citation appeared, this time for loitering a block over at a street corner that had been abandoned for decades. I looked outside. The street was empty. Leaves swirled in the wind, but there were no people. I pocketed the note, though it felt heavier than paper had any right to be. By the third citation, I began to realize the pattern. Every fine, every notice, every warning was for an action that had either happened long ago or hadn't happened yet. A minor crime recorded by a town that didn't exist, enforced by a law no one was alive to uphold, except me. I walked through the streets that afternoon. The fog, so thick it seemed closing around me. Street signs leaned, stoplights hung in mid-swing, and the wind carried a faint whisper that sounded like murmured objections. People pleading, maybe, though I saw no one. I checked each address on the citations. Empty, dust-coated buildings, windows dark, doors locked or falling off hinges. No evidence of life. Back at the station, more citations awaited me. The typewriter spat them one by one, as if impatient. There was no pause between sheets, no delay. Each paper carried a name, an offense, and a date. Most of the names were unfamiliar. Some, however, made me stop. Some bore my own handwriting. Names I recognized from my childhood, friends long gone, neighbors I hadn't seen in decades, and then, inevitably my own. I tried to leave the station. I really did. The fog outside swallowed the streets, and the patrol car wouldn't start. The tires spun in place, as if gripping onto something that wanted me to remain. I slammed my hands on the wheel, cursed, tried the radio. Silence. Dead, heavy, expectant silence. It pressed against me, insistent. I was trapped and I knew it. The next citation came in a bundle, thick and overwhelming. Every street, every corner, every abandoned building in town now carried a report, a violation, an offense, some trivial, some violent. Each word pressed against my conscience. I tried to ignore it, tried to file it, but the paper burned in my hands. The more I attempted to obey, the more stacked the citations became. They weren't just notifications. They were a chain binding me to the town, to the law, to the past and future simultaneously. I spent the evening walking the streets, reading each citation aloud, hoping that speaking the names would make the reality lighter. Trespassing, disturbing the peace, loitering, reckless driving. The wind carried the words back to me, whispering, echoing, layering with the faint sound of steps that weren't mine. Every time I paused, I felt it The unseen offenders were near, watching, waiting. Their absence was absolute, yet palpable. In the diner at the corner of Main Street, I found chairs stacked on tables, the counter coated with dust. I laid out the citations one by one, trying to make sense of them. It was like reading a map of a town that no longer existed. Roads drawn in ink that had faded decades ago, but still enforcing laws. Each line reinforced a truth I could not deny. I was the sheriff of a place where no lawbreakers remained, and yet, somehow, the law still operated. I returned to the station and found the typewriter waiting, keys moving as if pressed by invisible hands. A single citation emerged. Sheriff of Pine Hollow. Failure to observe town ordinance. My stomach churned. The town was watching me. It had always been watching me. I could feel its eyes in the peeling paint, in the warped wood, in the fog pressing against the windows. I tried to reason with it. I thought if I ignored the citations, they might stop. I crumpled several into balls and tossed them into the fireplace. But as the paper burned, I heard whispers from the walls. Quiet at first, then louder. Observe, enforce, do not forget. The smoke rose in lazy curls, carrying a faint odor of iron and dust. The words burned into my mind. I could not escape. I could not refuse. Night fell. Streetlights flickered, and the fog thickened to a white haze that blurred the line between street and sky. I walked the roads, carrying the citations, the badge heavy against my chest. Each step felt like a sentence served. Each breath a reminder that I was alone yet surrounded. My shadow moved unnaturally in the mist, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, always watching. By midnight, I had cataloged nearly every citation. I stacked them neatly on the desk at the station, but they seemed to multiply overnight. For every citation I filed, 2 more appeared in its place. I realized then that this was not a job with an end. This was a system that existed to trap attention itself, a law written not for people, but for persistence. I was the officer, the observer, and the offender all at once. I sat at the desk, holding my badge, staring at the papers. I thought about the lives these citations described, or pretended to describe, and the townspeople who had vanished, who might never have existed. I imagined their faces, blank and white, like ghosts pressed against fog glass. And I realized the truth I had been avoiding. The town did not need anyone to obey its laws. It needed someone to witness them, someone to acknowledge their existence, even when there was no one left to break them. I slept lightly in the station's back room, dreams filled with whispers, footsteps, and the relentless shuffle of paper. In those dreams, I was both sheriff and offender, enforcing laws I could never follow, observed by citizens who had long since disappeared. I woke before dawn, heart racing, the fog still thick outside, the town silent but alive with expectation. When morning light finally pressed against the station windows, the citations were still there waiting. I walked the streets again, moving from building to building, handing out fines to empty houses, imagining their occupants reading them, even though they never would. Every door I knocked on, every note I left felt like obedience. And still more appeared. The town had a rhythm, a pulse, and I had become its heart. My role was not to judge or enforce justice in the conventional sense. It was to be present, to maintain a semblance of order in a place where order no longer applied. My badge was not a symbol. It was a tether, anchoring me to a reality that had no one left but me to uphold it. By nightfall, I accepted it. I walked the streets under the streetlights that sputtered like dying candles, fog curling around me, and felt the weight of the town settle into my bones. I was sheriff. I was witness. I was alone. And the citations, the endless citations, were not mistakes. They were reminders, proof that the town's law did not end, because people vanished. It endured. And so would I. I returned to the station, stacked the newest citations of the others, and sat at the desk. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows. Inside, the papers whispered. I traced my fingers over the neat script of the typewritten notices. Observe, enforce, witness, persist. The words were commands, not suggestions. And for the first time, I realized the truth of my position. The town wasn't abandoned. It was eternal. And so was the duty it had assigned to me. I am the sheriff of Pine Hollow. The town may have no people. No living citizen remains. Yet the laws continue to write themselves, citations issuing for crimes no one will ever contest. And I am here to record, to deliver, to obey. Alone, yet not alone. Free, yet not free. The badge is heavy, but I do not remove it. It is no longer metal and leather. It is expectation. It is observation. It is memory, and it is warning. The streets are empty, but they speak. The town is gone, but it watches, and I am its law. Duty is eternal. Observation is eternal. Pine Hollow has no one left to follow its rules, yet its law will never end, and neither will I. The radio crackled before I touched it. That alone should have scared me more than it did. By the third week in Pine Hollow, I had learned that fear came slow here. It didn't jump out. It didn't scream. It settled in quietly, like dust on furniture, like mold creeping behind walls. The radio had been dead since the day I arrived. No static, no dispatch, no neighboring towns, just silence. So when it clicked on by itself, I didn't flinch. I just stared. A low hiss filled the cab. Not white noise, not quite silence either. Something in between. Then a voice came through. Unit 1 respond. My breath caught, because it was my voice. Not close, not similar. Mine. Same rough edge. Same tired drag on the words. Same slight rasp I'd had since high school after a bad bout of pneumonia. I reached for the mic without thinking. This is Unit 1, I said. Go ahead. There was a pause. Then the radio answered. This is Unit 1. It said back. My fingers tightened around the microphone. That's not funny, I whispered, even though no one was there to be joking. The radio hissed. Then my voice again. Report of disturbance. Old Mill Road. Respond. Old Mill Road. The words dropped into my stomach like stones. The mill had burned down before I was born. Nothing left but a collapsed frame and a concrete slab, swallowed by weeds. No one lives out there, I said. The radio clicked. Copy that, my voice replied. Then silence. I sat in the cruiser for a long time. The engine idled. Fog pressed against the windshield. Pine Hollow slept in that empty, watching where it always did. I told myself it was feedback, old wiring, some kind of loop. I told myself a lot of things. Eventually I drove, not because I wanted to, not because I believed there was a real call, but because the badge on my chest felt heavy in a way I couldn't explain. Because ignoring anything in this town never felt like an option. Old Mill Road was barely a road anymore. Cracked asphalt broken into islands. Grass growing through every seam. Trees leaning inward like they were tired of holding themselves up. My headlights washed over the remains of the mill. Charred beams. Twisted metal. A foundation that looked like a shallow grave. I stepped out of the cruiser. The night was too quiet. Not peaceful. Empty. The kind of empty that feels intentional. Sheriff's office. I called. My voice sounded small. No answer. I walked the perimeter. Boots crunching on gravel and dead leaves. Nothing moved. No footprints. No lights. No sound. After 10 minutes, I went back to the cruiser. The radio crackled as soon as I shut the door. Unit 1 clear scene. I stared at the dashboard. Clear scene, I said quietly. Clear scene, the radio replied. I drove back to the station with both hands clenched on the wheel. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my own voice calling for help. Not screaming, not panicked, just tired, like it had been doing this a long time. The next morning, I tried to test it. I turned the radio on. Nothing. I turned it off. Nothing. I tapped the mic. Unit 1, I said, radio check. Silence. I almost felt relief. Then I reached for my coffee. The radio crackled. Unit 1. My voice said, I froze. Go ahead. I whispered. Suspicious person reported. Pine Street, near the old church. My stomach tightened. Pine Street ran past the church where the pews were rotting and the cross had fallen sideways. No one reported anything. I said. The radio answered. Copy. I didn't move. Minutes passed. Nothing else came. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself I wouldn't chase phantom calls. But the feeling stayed. That weight, that sense of being watched by something that wore my face and spoke with my mouth. By afternoon, the call came again. This time I was walking the main street. The radio on my belt crackled. Unit 1 domestic disturbance. Cedar Lane. I stopped in the middle of the road. Cedar Lane ended a row of houses burned so badly, they looked melted. I'm already out, I said. No vehicle. Copy, my voice said. Respond on foot. I don't know why that broke me. Maybe because it sounded so reasonable, like I had said it 1,000 times before. I walked. Every step felt heavier than the last. Cedar Lane smelled like wet ash even after all these years. The houses stood in blackened rows, windows empty, roofs collapsed inward like bowed heads. Sheriff's office, I called. My voice echoed. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not ahead of me, not behind me. All around. Soft, slow, unhurried. I spun in a circle. Nothing. The footsteps continued. Not getting closer. Not moving away. Just walking. Like people pacing in dark rooms. Who's there? I asked. No answer. The radio crackled. Unit 1, subject not cooperating. My hands were shaking. There is no subject, I said. Copy, my voice replied. The footsteps stopped. All at once. The silence after was worse. I left. I didn't clear the scene. I didn't report anything. I just walked until Cedar Lane disappeared behind me. That night, I sat at the station desk staring at the radio. It sat there quietly. Innocent. Just a box of plastic and wires. I unplugged it. Nothing happened. I unplugged the backup. Nothing. I unplugged every cord I could find. The radio still crackled. Unit 1 status check. My mouth went dry. How are you doing this? I asked. There was a pause. Then my voice came back softer. Working. I stood up so fast my chair fell over. Who are you? I demanded. The radio hissed. Then, Unit 1. That was all. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. Burglary at houses with no doors. Assaults in empty fields. Noise complaints in forests. Every call came from my voice. Every response came from my voice. Sometimes I tried to change what I said. I would answer wrong. Unit 1 to dispatch. I said once, I'm 10-7. Out of service. The radio replied. Copy. Remain on duty. Another time I said, I quit. The radio waited. Then said negative. That was it. No argument. No explanation. Just refusal. I started noticing something worse. The radio began calling before I did. I would be walking, thinking, and suddenly I would hear, Unit 1 en route. Then, seconds later, I would feel myself start walking toward some place I hadn't chosen. Like my body remembered a routine. My mind didn't. I began leaving the radio behind, hanging it on hooks, locking it in drawers, burying it under piles of paper. It always ended up back on my belt, or on the desk beside me, or crackling from somewhere in the room. One night, I woke up in my bunk to the sound of whispering, not from the radio. From my own mouth, I was talking in my sleep, calling in locations, clearing scenes, responding to dispatch. I pressed my hand over my lips. The word stopped. The radio on the nightstand crackled. Unit 1 continued. I don't remember falling back asleep. After that, I stopped trying to understand. Understanding didn't help. Nothing here wanted to be understood. It wanted to be maintained. The patrols weren't about stopping crime. They weren't about protecting anyone. They were about motion, about repetition, about keeping something alive by pretending it still had a purpose. The radio wasn't copying me. I think I was copying it. Or maybe we were both copying something else. Something older than the town. Something that learned my voice because it needed one. Now, when the radio crackles, I answer. Not because I want to, not because I believe there's anyone out there, but because not answering feels worse. Like holding your breath underwater and realizing there's no surface. The calls still loop, my voice calling me answering myself. A circle with no beginning and no end. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if the original me is already gone, if I'm just the echo, the response, the part that keeps walking because it was told to. The radio crackles. Unit 1 status check. I lift the mic. This is Unit 1. I say, and somewhere something answers. In my voice. Every time. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, Pine Hollow would forget about me. That was the plan. Not a good plan. Not a smart one. Just the only one I had left. I stopped answering the radio. I stopped filling out the logbook. I stopped wearing the badge. I told myself that if I didn't play along, the town would move on. Find someone else. Find another poor soul to sit behind a desk and walk empty streets and pretend order still existed. Because that's all this was, right? A performance. A lie everyone agreed to keep telling. Except Pine Hollow didn't forget. It noticed. The first thing that happened was small. I woke up and the badge was back on my nightstand. Not where I'd thrown it. Not buried under my clothes. Placed neatly. Centered. Like someone cared about how it looked. The metal caught the gray morning light. It looked clean. Cleaner than I remembered. I didn't touch it. I left it there and walked out. The station door was unlocked. That wasn't new. It never locked. But the lights were on. They hadn't been on in weeks. I stood in the doorway, listening to the low hum of electricity. The building felt awake. Not alive. Awake. I turned around. The cruiser was parked out front. I hadn't driven it since I decided I was done. I checked the dust on the hood. Gone. Tires still warm. Someone had used it. Or something. I backed away. That was my mistake. Because the radio crackled. Not from my belt. Not from the cruiser. From inside the station. Unit 1 report to desk. I didn't answer. I walked past the building. Down the empty main road. Past boarded shops. Past houses with no curtains. Past the school with the broken swings. Every step felt like I was walking away from a cliff edge. But I kept going. At the edge of town, the trees closed in. The road narrowed. The air felt heavier. I told myself that once I crossed that line, Pine Hollow wouldn't matter anymore, that it only owned what stayed inside its borders. I reached the old welcome sign. Welcome to Pine Hollow. The paint was flaking. Someone had recently scrubbed it clean. I hadn't noticed that before. I stepped past it. Nothing happened. No thunder. No wind. No sudden wave of fear. Just the sound of my boots on asphalt. I kept walking for maybe 30 seconds. Then I realized something. I hadn't passed the sign. It was still beside me. Same angle. Same peeling corner. Same rust stain shaped like a crooked tear. I stopped. The sign was still there. I took another step. Still there. I turned around. The town was behind me. I turned back. The sign was in front of me. Like I was standing on a treadmill disguised as a road. Panic rose slow and thick. No! I whispered. I walked faster. Then jogged. Then ran. The sign stayed beside me. Not chasing. Not moving. Just always there. I collapsed to my knees. The sign finally disappeared. In its place was a station. Right in front of me. Like I had never left. The front door was open. The lights were on. The radio inside crackled. Unit 1 overdue. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there in the dirt, staring at the doorway. Something inside me broke in a quiet way, like a thread snapping. I went inside. Not because I wanted to, not because I agreed, but because fighting felt pointless. The badge was on the desk, next to the logbook, open to a blank page. A pen rested on top, waiting. I didn't touch any of it. I sat in the chair. The chair felt warm, like someone had just stood up. The radio crackled. Town needs a sheriff. I laughed. It came out wrong. Dry. Cracked. There is no town, I said. No answer. There are no people, I said. Silence. There is nothing here. The radio clicked. Still needs a sheriff. I looked around. The walls were the same. The desk. The bulletin board with faded notices. But something felt off. Not wrong. Older. Like the building had been there long before Pine Hollow had a name. Long before roads. long before signs. I thought about the men who came before me, the ones in the logbook, names that appeared once, never crossed out, never followed by retirement dates, never followed by death notices, just names, like headstones without bodies. I opened the logbook. The blank page wasn't blank. It had writing, neat, careful, my handwriting, today's date, my name, under position, sheriff. I slammed the book shut. I didn't agree to this, I said. The radio crackled. Agreement not required. I stood up. I'm leaving. Negative. I don't belong here. Silence. I'm not your sheriff. The radio waited. Then, who else? The question hit harder than I expected. I didn't have an answer. There was no one else. No travelers. No lost hikers. No families passing through. Pine Hollow didn't let outsiders wander in. It picked. It waited. It took. You don't need anyone, I said. The radio hissed. Then, softer than before, things fall apart. I thought about the broken houses, the empty streets, the burned mill, the church with the crooked cross. Maybe Pine Hollow wasn't dead. Maybe it was decaying, slowly, and decay needed something to keep shape. A frame, a skeleton, a sheriff. Why me? I asked. The radio crackled. Still here. That was it. Not special. Not chosen. Just present. Available. I backed away from the desk. I won't do anything, I said. I won't patrol. I won't answer calls. I won't pretend. The radio clicked. Minimum duty accepted. I stared. What does that mean? Silence. Hours passed. Nothing happened. No calls. No movement. Just me sitting in the station. I started to feel normal. Not safe, but quiet. Maybe this was the compromise. Maybe Pine Hollow only needed someone in the chair. Someone breathing. Someone existing inside the shape of the roll. The sun never moved. The light outside stayed gray and flat. Time didn't feel broken. It felt irrelevant. Eventually, I stood up. My legs felt stiff. I walked to the door. Nothing stopped me. I stepped outside. The street looked the same. Empty. Still, I took a few steps. No radio crackle. No voice. I walked farther. Past the cruiser. Past the signpost. Toward the welcome sign. My heart pounded. I reached it. I touched the wood. Solid. Real. I stepped past it. The sign stayed behind me. I kept walking. 10 steps. 20. The town grew smaller. I didn't look back. I didn't run. I just walked. The road stretched ahead. For the first time since I arrived, it didn't loop. I smiled. Just a little. Then I felt it. The weight on my chest. The familiar pressure. I reached up. The badge was pinned to my shirt. I don't remember putting it on. The radio crackled. From my pocket. Unit 1, you can roam. My stomach twisted. What about the town? I asked. Town stays. My voice replied. And me? Pause. You're still sheriff. I stopped walking. I left. Negative. I crossed the line. Jurisdiction follows. I understood then. It was never about the borders. Never about Pine Hollow. The roll wasn't tied to the place. The place was tied to the roll. The town didn't need a sheriff to protect it. It needed a sheriff to exist, to justify itself, to pretend it was still something other than a pile of rotting memories. And now that roll lived in me, not in the station, not in the cruiser, not in the badge, in me. I sit on the side of the road now, writing this in a notebook I found in my pocket, my handwriting, same as the logbook. The road ahead is empty. The road behind me is empty. Somewhere, the radio waits. I don't know how long I can stay here. I don't know what happens if I stop breathing. Maybe Pine Hollow collapses. Maybe nothing changes. All I know is this. If you ever hear a radio crackle in an empty place, if you ever hear your own voice call your name, don't answer. Don't step into the roll. Because the town doesn't care who you are. It only cares that someone is willing. And once it decides you're the one, it never lets its sheriff leave.